This is a Film Stories original podcast.
We made this.
Hi, I'm Frank Spotnitz. I produce The X-Files, and you're listening to The X-Cast.
Welcome back, everybody, to the X-Cast. As ever, the truth is in here. I'm your host today, Carl Sweeney, and thank you very much for joining us for this episode, which is all about the season finale of Season 7, Requiem. And to go with the sort of Last Supper theme that's suggested by the episode, we've got more people here than normal, haven't we? So let me bring everybody in. So first of all, my co-producer of the show, one of them, Kurt North. Hi, Kurt.
Hello, how are we?
Yeah, I'm all right. How are you doing? You're the resident Season 7 grouch, but I think this will be more up your alley, this one, won't it, I think?
Well, we'll see. We'll see what we think. I'll leave people to have a guess. But yeah, I'm just expecting maybe some more guests suddenly appear about 3/4 of the way through the episode, and we'll set a table up, and we'll be good.
That was our original idea, wasn't it?
Yeah,
then we decided that it was just impractical. so we're going to stick to 4 people here today. So glad to have you with me, Kurt. Cathy Glinski is also here. Hi, Cathy.
Hi, Carl.
How are you doing today?
I'm great. I'm very happy to talk about Requiem
This
anytime.
is one of your favorites, isn't it? This is one of your favorite episodes,
It is.
Cathy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. And we also thought it wouldn't be a season finale without Darren Mooney. So, Darren, good to be with you again.
Absolute pleasure to be here. And I'm really glad that, like, you set that up with Kurt. It's like, I mean, you don't love the 7th season, but I mean, you got to love Requiem because at least the 7th season ends, right? I mean, it's got that going for it. I'm very much in the Cathy side of this debate. Not to tip my hand too early, but yes.
Yeah, no, I am as well. I really like this episode. So yeah, Requiem, the 22nd and final episode of season 7, written by Chris Carter, directed by Kim Manners, first broadcast on the 21st of May in the year 2000. And this, of course, is the episode where Mulder and Scully return to the site of their first investigation together. Where should we begin? Okay, Cathy, I think we should start with you. So just some general thoughts, a mark out of 10. Just why is this one of your favourite episodes, I guess, is the obvious question.
I give it a 10 out of 10. It is my favorite. When I did a ranking, an ultimate ranking, it came out as number 1. I love it because it takes us full circle. It brings all the major players in and uses them well, not like we got a couple of seasons later. I think this was done very effectively. It tells a good story. It shows us growth and change and stagnation where it is. And I really love the way it was done.
Yeah, great stuff. 10 out of 10. I thought you might go full marks on this one.
Well, to be fair, there are parts that are not quite perfect, but there are other parts that are more than perfect. So it evens out to a 10.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Darren, how about you? Would you go along with that? I mean, you've tipped your hand. You think this is a very good episode too, Darren?
I do. I absolutely adore this. This is one of my favorite episodes of the show, and certainly one of my favorite episodes of to give Kurt his due, somewhat uneven 7th season as a whole. In terms of marks out of 10, I'd probably go a 9.5, if only because I am cautious about such things. I'm kind of very much like you work hard for a 10. You get a 9.5 and you're happy. That's an A grade. I don't give A pluses. So, you're in that conversation. I think it is a remarkable piece of television. I think it is a remarkable piece of the X-Files. And I think it's an interesting example of what makes the X-Files so fascinating as a cultural document. And we'll probably dive into that when we talk about the episode, but because it exists in a context that is radically different. The context it was written in was different from the context in which it was shot, which is different from the context in which it was broadcast. And all these things come together to create an episode that could simultaneously mean so many different things, but because of the context in which it was broadcast, it means one particular thing. And that is something that is very X-Files-y. In a fundamental conspiracy theory, make sense of the universe, narrativize everything sort of way. So yeah, no, I absolutely love this episode, and I think it's one that'll be fun to discuss.
Okay, so I think we're averaging 9.75 out of 10 at the minute if we we divide them.
Do I have a little card? I should have a little card I can hold up.
Yeah, I won't be able to work it out after this one because my maths isn't that good. But Kurt, yeah, you must be high on this. I think you'll be big on this one. I think you like Requiem. What do you say?
Right. Okay. Here we go. No, I'm being coy. 9 out of 10 for me. I think it's one of the best episodes of the season by far. As you know, mythology is really really important part in my X-Files life. I think things like Amor Fati, Closure, Ziononzite, this and Enemy are all really high scoring marks. So if I'm going to give Enemy 9 out of 10, I'm definitely going to be giving this 9 out of 10 as well. So I think it's just really tightly written. I don't think there's anything wasted. I think it's really interesting how they bring everything back in and you miss some bits out, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But the way that they actually bring things from season 1 right through the show's run, and almost in season order as well. When I watched it this afternoon, I was like, that happened in season 2, so they brought that in after that happened from season 1. It was really interesting, that perspective. And it also feels a bit, and I think ethereal or out of time to me as well. It feels like I'm not quite sure where it fits in the whole X-Files universe in a lot of ways. But it does make me feel like it's a fantastic way to go out. And I actually vividly remember everything that was going on around this moment, you know, the whole aspect of where's it going to be an 8th season, all that kind of thing, and the rigmarole around it, and it made for fascinating watching at the time. So I think from that perspective as well, it was a moment in time that I remember well. Whereas necessarily 7th season, like I've said over the course of 7th season, there is some good things, there's some bad things, but generally, there's moments within the 7th season I remember, again, going back to Closure. So, yeah, I think it's a really fascinating and brilliant piece of television.
I fully agree. It's a 9 out of 10 for me as well. I think it works, I suppose, to follow on what Darren was saying, I think this works really well as what it ultimately became, which is abridged to the next season, to season 8. I think it would have worked really well, actually, had another season not been forthcoming, to be honest. I think it would have worked fine as a setup to another film coming at some point later on. I just fundamentally think it works very well as an episode of TV. I think it's quite ingenious, actually, what Carter managed with this one. I think it moves really well. I think it accomplishes a lot. I think it deftly manages all the different characters that are involved. Produces quite a few great moments along the way. I think it finds interesting things and surprising things for Mulder and Scully to do, and I think it's quite a clever reflection on like the long run of the series. You know, like the full circle thing we've already alluded to. Obviously, that would have hit a bit differently if the circle had been fully closed here, and some of the things at the end of the episode would register differently, probably. But as it is, yeah, I think it's a very powerful episode. I think so every time I see it, actually. So, yeah, really pleased to be here with you all talking about this one. Cathy, what are your thoughts on like how accomplished it is, considering what we know about how everything was kind of in flux at the time, you know, in terms of the production and all that? It's kind of an interesting thing to ponder, isn't it, I think?
Yeah, absolutely. I was vaguely aware of what was going on behind the scenes as I watched it originally. I didn't concern myself much with that, but I did know the existence of a season 8 was up in the air. So I think that watching this just made me love the show for everything it had been even more, because I think it really did give the sense of wrapping things up. We've completed a journey when we get to the end of this episode. I agree with you. This could have worked for me as an end to the series. And I can say that now because I know what came after. I think. Yeah, as I was watching it as a fan, if they had ended the way this episode ended and then they said, that's it, I would have been really mad. I would have been livid. I would have loved it moving from here to movies, as long as we knew a movie was in the works. But I really do think this episode accomplishes everything it sets out to and ties up the series beautifully.
I want to throw a question to the group, actually, just on that, out of curiosity, because I'm wondering, like, we mentioned the prospects, and I think that the plan here was basically, it was Carter wanted to end the show at the 7th season. The 7th season is kind of Schrodinger's final season, where you've interviews throughout where everyone's like, oh, we think it's time to end it, but we're not entirely sure yet. I think at one point Carter says, like, it was Elian Gonzalez's future was more certain in the most 2000 reference imaginable than the X-Files.
Yeah, can you give us a footnote on that, Darren?
Alien Gonzalez was a Cuban child who managed to make it to Florida, and there was a big extradition hearing about him. It was all over the news in early 2000.
Yeah.
So that was Carter, kind of like a very specific cultural reference at the time. I think he made it in April. This was broadcast in May. But the plan was, as Cathy alluded to jump into movies. The plan was like Carter, like, and he's on record about this. He's given interviews where it's like he wanted to do 5 seasons and then transition into movies. Something like, say, the original Star Trek show, where 3 seasons and then it becomes a series of movies. Fox convinced him to come on for the 6th and 7th season, and the impression was that he wanted, after the 7th season, to move into feature films that release once every couple of years as a big franchise. That would take a lot of the production burden off him and everybody else. However, I do wonder if, let's say, for example, obviously the 8th season didn't happen. Let's say Duchovny didn't settle 3 days before this was broadcast, and Fox didn't announce that they were bringing the show back for an 8th season 3 days before this aired. Let's say that they couldn't get the irreconcilable differences worked out in time for a series of movies while the show was still hot. I do wonder, what do we think it would be if the inevitable, because the revival of the X-Files was always going to happen in the 2010s, just based on chronology and it being a property that had that value and nostalgia. What do we think in terms of Requiem being the last episode before a 20-year later revival, or a 16, 17, like something like the Twin Peaks: The Return?
How's any? How's any?
That's exactly what I'm thinking. Mulder disappears, and the hook for the revival is Mulder's back. That's an interesting thing to ponder.
Just the initial reaction is that I really liked the Twin Peaks revival and the time it took to explore the various threads that it had left dangling. Having looked at the season 10, where it was like, right, we're back in the office by the end of episode 1, I'm not sure it would have been handled quite so deftly. So I think potentially interesting. I'm not sure how it would have panned out in practice. Kurt, what do you reckon?
I would have been okay with it, but I agree on the aspect of, if they'd gone and done a season 10 of, like, within seconds, they're picking up a poster and going, let's go and investigate. It's like, what? And so, yeah. I don't mind ambivalent endings, ambiguous ambivalent. But that way is ambivalent, isn't it? It is like some people will love to hate it. So, ambiguous endings, it would fascinate me seeing some of the fiction. And probably there is fan fiction on this before anything else happened in between season 7 and 8. But I would have been fine with it. It would have made me wonder what could have happened.
I love the idea in theory. I love the idea of the idea. I would have absolutely hated if that was really what happened. I love thinking about that, and I'm so glad that's not the way it worked out. I wish season 10 hadn't been what it was. I would have liked something better than what we got. But I don't think I could have waited 20 years for more. I like to think that that's how it could have happened, but I really don't think that I'm a big enough person to accept that. So.
Well, it's fascinating. It's fascinating, actually. Just on a side note on that, is ever since X-Files stopped, there's always this, like, there might be a movie in 3 years, or there might be something. It always felt like there was something coming down the line. It always felt like there was 2 or 3 years away from something. Whereas something like Twin Peaks, it just felt like nothing was ever going to happen, and it did 25 years later. So yeah, I think it would have been really interesting if you felt especially in the TV at the time, that there was a definite stop. That would have been interesting without any movie chance or whatever. Because I think that plays a big element of what, Darren, you're asking, is that there's no indication that anything's going to happen. Yeah, where Carter kept going, saying stuff, didn't he? He was like, "Oh, well, maybe we'll get."
And we'll do comic books that will be in continuity for the year before we announce that the TV show's coming back. In which case, the comics are out of continuity. Never mind, forget that ever happened. I do agree with Carl, actually, in that I think that there's no way. First of all, I think if Carter had attempted something like Twin Peaks: The Return, the after is probably a good indication of what that might have looked like. And I also do think that Fox was never going to allow an X-Files TV show that would not have Mulder and Scully back in the office within at least 2 episodes of the return, I suspect. But I find myself pondering that when I think of the ending of Requiem, because I'm a big 8th season fan, but it's like, it feels like for pop culture, the X-Files ends with Mulder and Scully. Like, it feels like, as much as I love Doggett as a character, as much as I love Reyes as a character, it really feels like if the show had stopped here, just a year or 2 off its cultural peak, it coming back would have been a different proposition, perhaps. But I don't know.
I think you're right about what people think of when they hear about the X-Files. They think of Mulder and Scully. That's why it was very interesting to me that when it went up on Disney Plus in the UK, the picture you actually see is Doggett and Scully. It's not Mulder and Scully. I think they might have changed it now. But it just doesn't feel right. Do you know what I mean?
UK very big on Doggett. Dog is very popular in foreign markets.
That's not the worst thing about Disney Plus's treatment of the X-Files, but that's another discussion. Because lots of the episodes are kind of mislabeled and things like that. Do we think this episode, like this whole situation, I think in some ways it sort of plays to Chris Carter's strengths, because I think of it as kind of an interesting counterpoint to something like The End. With The End, the film had already been made and they knew exactly what they had to prepare for and aim for. With this, it's kind of the inverse, isn't it? It has to accommodate all these different eventualities that were kind of up in the air at the time of shooting. And I think he found a very clever way to do it here, actually. Darren, what do you think? Do you think it kind of suits his sort of... the way he worked, maybe?
I do. I'm not a big fan of The Truth. I think, Cathy, I like the 8th season, but I broadly agree with Cathy's point that it's a series of diminishing returns when you get to ending the X-Files. It's like the X-Files stumbles across a perfect ending and then keeps going and lands on a less perfect ending, and then keeps going and lands on an even less perfect ending, and eventually you end up with what you end up with. And I think when you look at something like where Carter knows that he is ending, so something like, for example, The Truth, a lot of that is Carter seemingly filibustering to the audience about how he always knew exactly what he was doing and everything fits together perfectly, and shut up, internet, stop yelling at me about how I don't know the grand mythology I've constructed. Whereas Requiem, I think, actually does play to Carter's strengths as a writer and to the show's strengths, which are, despite some of the obsession that I think a lot of people had over the mythology, the idea that it needed to fit together, it needed to be explained, everything needed to have its place, everything needed to be accounted for. I think that the X-Files worked best when it existed in this kind of liminal, ambiguous space. I think that, Kurt described it as an ethereal episode, and it very much is, because there's something otherworldly about it. Like, they go back to Bellflower, Oregon, which is obviously not only named for Carter's, the town where Carter grew up, it's obviously the town from the first episode of the X-Files, but the first episode of the X-Files was shot in Vancouver. Requiem is shot in Los Angeles and California. You cannot perfectly recreate the Bellflower that existed in the first episode. So it ends up becoming this thing that's kind of almost like Brigadier. It's almost out of time. It doesn't really look right. It doesn't look like you remember it looking. It doesn't look like you think it should look. And it has this quality of being out of the world, so to speak. And I like that. And I think that the mysteries of the show being left unresolved, the idea that Mulder wanders into the woods one day and just doesn't wander out again, is arguably as perfect a resolution for the X-Files as you could have. Because the X-Files is about these questions that you cannot answer. They're about trying to explain things that you cannot explain, or to make sense of things that exist beyond the human capacity to understand. So I think Requiem would have been a perfect ending for the show, and I think it plays to Carter's strengths, because it's a small scale story. It's very intimate. It's very personal. It's about all his core themes in terms of trauma, suffering, loss. It's got this wonderful melancholy, funereal atmosphere running through it. I mean, we'll talk about particular scenes in a moment, but it's very clear watching it that it's like, no, we're done. This is the end, even before they go to Bellflower, even before you get that coming full circle, X marks a spot in the ground stuff. So yeah, no, I think it works in that sense. I think I have a huge soft spot for the final episode of the 8th season, but I do think it works better than either The Truth or My Struggle For, when it comes to drawing down the shutters on the show.
Yeah, I think it's a better episode than those episodes, certainly. I can tell you that it's the highest rated episode of the season on IMDb, with an 8.7 out of 10 from everybody who's rated it. So, Cathy, you would agree with that? You think this is your favourite episode of all? So I presume you agree with that. Yeah,
definitely best of the season too.
I agree. I think I do agree with that too. Kurt, would you go along with that?
Yeah, I'd say there's a close run for Amor Fati, but I think just for what this entails and what this means, I think this would be probably the best of the season, just from that perspective alone.
And Darren, if you're a 9.5, are you seeing other episodes in this season which are sort of about the same level? Or
X-Cops is probably, I think, the only one that I would definitively put above it. It's the only episode that I would say in the 7th season is an unequivocal masterpiece and one of the best the show ever did. Requiem is probably second after that, I think.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. Yeah, so we're all pretty keen on this one. So I think without any further ado, we should jump into the episode breakdown and take a closer look at Requiem. Like you've alluded to, Darren, we're back in Bellflower, Oregon for the teaser. So I watched this on my Blu-ray disc. The legend on the screen specifies that it's present day. So there was no previously on the X-Files segment on the disc, but I assume there was once, and they've cut that out, and that's why it says present day. So yeah, whether we realise it yet or not, we're back to the scene of the pilot. We get the detective we've seen before, all of that, the crash, and then his deputy who is down but then has a double. I mean, in and of itself, as a sequence just on its own, I think it's a fairly standard teaser. But I think that also highlights the strength of the episode, which Darren has alluded to, which is that the basic scenario here with the crashed UFO is kind of interesting because it's quite straightforward and it kind of harkens back to stuff from like the early days, doesn't it, of the series, I think. How do you feel about the teaser, Cathy?
I think it's very exciting. Like you said, it could be a very straightforward teaser, except for the things we get that let us know that we're going back to the beginning, the Bellflower, Oregon, but it tells us it's present day, so we know we're returning. We've got the dispatcher saying we've got a 1013, which is always a nice, fun little thing.
Oh, yeah.
We see Detective Miles, and I think most of us would remember him if we've been watching from the beginning. We see the clock and the watch moving backwards, so we know there's going to be time anomalies, and then the power goes out and it's looking familiar. And then we get to see green acid blood and a shapeshifter. And it's like by the end of this teaser, I'm like, yes, this is good stuff. So I love it.
What I actually like about that time going with the clock, it's not the missing 9 minutes, it's a way to reverse him back.
Yes, we're
It's
rewinding.
going backwards in time.
We're taking us back to the start, literally, in a very literal, physical, geographical, and
Yeah.
temporal sense. Yeah.
So, well, go on, Darren. What do you think of this beginning to the episode? Then?
Oh, no, I think it's really good. I do love the imagery of the watch. And again, obviously, as Cathy points out, like that standard UFO stuff, the show's always been aware of kind of missing time and manipulation of time. I think having it literally go back in like... And again, I'm a sucker for the structural device of having something come full circle, of like having the same guest stars in your final episode that you did in the first stars, of even that Seinfeld thing of like having your last episode close with the same conversation that opened your first episode, in a sense that like we have moved as an audience in a full circle, and the question is how the characters have grown in that difference. And so if you put them in the same place, are they fundamentally different? So yeah, no, I really like the introduction, and I think you're right to say that it's a very basic setup, and I like that it doesn't get in its own way. Like I like that it doesn't overcomplicate itself with mythology. It doesn't have people like referencing past events. You could watch this as a casual viewer, even if you hadn't seen the pilot. Although obviously, if you've seen the pilot, as Cathy points out, you get a lot more out of it. But it's easy to follow as far as like late mythology episodes go, I would argue.
Yeah. No, I agree, and I like that. I like that after all the stuff we've had involving like the Last Temptation of Mulder and the walk-ins, and I actually really like all those episodes, But what we end up with here is a relatively straightforward story involving a crashed UFO, don't we? So it can't quite be a full-on like season 1 throwback because we get elements like the alien bounty hunter, which came in later, and all that things that came in when the mythology expanded. But given where we've been of late, it does feel like quite a stripped down. I mean, I think you used the word intimate, Darren, didn't you? It does feel quite stripped down here, and in some respects, and then ultimately becomes very epic and has very big stakes as well. Let's talk about those scenes. We get a few of them because it cuts back and forth to other things. But the auditor, I think, is an interesting character. So this is the guy talking about like the car rental totals, just the expenditure in general. We see Mulder with him a couple of times, don't we? And we'll also see Scully with him. Cathy, what did you make of all this stuff?
I think the auditor, Chesty Short, is making a very good case for closing the X-Files and ending the show.
Yeah.
Mulder has found all his answers. Everything's been resolved. What more is there to do? And, Mulder is saying, no, it's not all resolved. But hasn't it been, really? I mean... what more could he want to do? He found out what happened to his sister. He knows about the conspiracy. The syndicate is gone. The project. He's found the love of his life. I mean, what else is there? Why is he still arguing to keep it open? So I think it's a really clever way to introduce the audience to the idea that there has to be an end.
I was going to say, I think because of that full circle idea as well, I just love the fact that one of the comments that Scully makes in the office is like, we've been threatened with shutdown before, and it's like this is probably the most realist version of it. It's like if you can't spend any money, but also the fact that the way that it's played, that everything he's saying is right. It's like, well, why haven't you been back to Belfleur, Oregon? Why have you not gone back to other cases where you might have actually found other things? You've just moved on to the next thing. And I think that's really astute of again the writing that they've gone through. And I know you've got, like, as I say, just this whole go where the aliens were. It makes so much sense, and it's like we've been wondering this for 7 years, and that all of a sudden makes sense. I think it's marvelous.
Yeah, they're pretty clever sequences, aren't they, Darren? I think
they are. Like, I mean, and it's great because like that cliche of it works on multiple levels, but like even the multiple levels that it work on multiple levels. Where, as Cathy points out, you can see this as Mulder having a conversation with, like, the Chris Carter as a showrunner, explaining why the show needs to be shut down. Like, it's notable that you would argue Chesty Short, a great Chris Carter name, is playing the same function that Carter played in Anasazi, where like he shows up on in the FBI board. And it's like, yeah, so you guys,
I've got a question on Chesty Short. Is that a play on the fact that Gillian Anderson got the part in the first place? Because the executives wanted to have someone who was probably a bit more, but.
Chesty, and I got someone who was short.
When is the name Chesty Short? Is that said on screen? Because
no, it's certainly not said on screen. No, dear goodness.
It's in the credits and it's in the script.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
No, I imagine that would have changed the tone of the meeting. I can't imagine Mulder getting Chesty Short and doing nothing with it. I'd be very disappointed. And he's really off his game. But you can read that as very similar to the Carter scene in Anasazi, where Carter's like talking to them. He's like, haven't you guys done what you're supposed to do by now? Shouldn't we be like moving on, wrapping up, growing up, that sort of stuff? But I also think that you can also read it at another level where Carter isn't Short. Carter is instead Mulder. And the conversation that he's having is with the network. Because obviously, and again, I don't know how much backstory you guys have done in terms of the 7th season, Carter's relationship with Fox at this point is strained, to put it lightly, in large part due to everything that happened with Harsh Realm, the television show that he launched, and was cancelled after 3 episodes aired, and the rest of the episodes were burnt, I think, on FX, just to fill up programming space. And you look at the kind of dialogue that's happening there. You have Herzog, Doug Herzog, who'd come in, taken over Fox, wanted to turn it into kind of an indie broadcaster, and basically ran the network into the ground. Regarded as, I believe, one of the worst seasons in the history of network television, is what that season of television was. Only one surviving new show, Malcolm in the Middle. And the reason why the X-Files ended up coming back was because Fox had nothing else to air. Like, they were so desperate for content that they had to like renew the X-Files, which was seen as a show that was like past its sell-by date and past its prime. And so you have this idea that maybe through this script, Carter is working out some of his grievances with Fox and with the network. So you have this thing about like talking about, gas expenses, the motel rooms alone, which is like, oh, why are you guys always shooting on location? Why can't you guys like shoot on sets? Why do you have to go to places to shoot the show? You have things like, so for example, that the bit at the end where Chesty says, it's not unreasonable. It's just a matter of reducing your vision, which is a line that I think every Hollywood like writer, director, and producer has heard at some point from a studio. It's like, why can't you do this thing cheaper? Why can't you like put it in front of a green screen? So I do think that there's a bit of Carter like grinding his axe with his relationship with Fox at that moment in time in that interaction between the two, I think.
And, well, it becomes quite, I think, a healthy level of wish fulfillment there, because Mulder apparently decks the guy. So, I mean, healthy in the sense... Well, because it's better for Chris Carter to be getting his fictional characters to behave that way than for Chris Carter in real life to be acting that way towards...
what's remarkable... like, again, like, Carter is, like, a remarkable interview subject. Like, you've had... Like, I think you've had Chris Knowles on who's actually interviewed him, but if you watch any of his interviews, Carter is a very diplomatic person. He's very easy to work with, according to the network, which is part of the reason why he's probably gotten as far as he is, because like if you are a touchy creator, you don't get the chances that Carter gets with the other projects outside of the X-Files. And I think that like it's notable that like one of the few times Carter actually seems angry in interviews is during that like 1999-2000 phase where he's talking about Herzog, and he's talking about how, you know, he got, like, he does interviews, I think, around the launch of the 8th season where he's like, yeah, this guy came in and he got thrown out and I'm still here, which is like uncharacteristically frank when it comes to Carter talking about his relationship with executives. So I do think, I think that frustration is palpable if you read a lot of the coverage from the time. I think Herzog's attitude was, I'm the young gun, I'm coming in, I know what's going to change. I know what the 21st century is going to look like, and it's not going to look like this show that's been on the air since 1993, written by these old fogies who are out of touch and disconnected. And you kind of get the sense that bristled a bit when it comes to the coverage of the show.
The only other thing I wanted to say about these sequences with the Auditor is I think they're quite clever in the sense that they set up the idea, which comes back later, which is that these scenes are all about the financial cost of running these investigations. Later, Mulder goes on to remark about the personal cost for the characters. And I think it's nice that it sets it up here.
And again, like, and like, it's worth, again, not to get too pointed in terms of the production metaphor. Like, Carter's talked about how, like, for him, providing gainful employment for people was a large part of, like, why he did the work that he did. Stuff like keeping Millennium on the air, and stuff like doing Harsh Realm, and then doing The Lone Gunman in Vancouver, to keep the people who had been working on the X-Files in Vancouver employed and kind of working and having those steady jobs. Things like saying that, like, he's flat out said that the reason why he stayed with the X-Files was because he promised Anderson and Duchovny that he would be with the show as long as they were. So I think, I imagine if you want to read that metaphor, you can. I don't know if it's that detailed or that exact, but I think you could read that in there if you wanted.
We haven't really mentioned Scully's talk with the auditor, and I think those are very important story-wise, because they're focusing on, you were meant to be this objective observer and report on Mulder and debunk Mulder's work, and yet now you're a believer. You can't really say that you're objective anymore, and it's become personal for her. And she struggles. She doesn't want to say I believe, but she's really realizing that she's at a point where she wants to believe because of the things she's experienced. It's become more than just an observation. It's become personal for her. And I think that's very clever that the next time we see her, she's staring at the I want to believe poster. And I think it's very effective. There's some deleted scenes that you can see them on the Blu-ray set where there's more dialogue between Scully and the auditor, and they really do focus on that. She's a believer now. She's a believer. She's a believer.
What I find fascinating with that, Cathy, as well, is that you kind of have like a shift in focus between Scully and Skinner, because Skinner at the end says exactly what Scully says at the beginning, and I always find it really fascinating when Scully specifically says alien that's when she faints. It's like it's that defining moment when she says arguably alien, and that's when she goes down. And I think that it's interesting that's in itself. It's played. It's almost like you've got three moving parts there, with Skinner kind of now saying I've seen things I cannot deny.
Yeah,
Scully's getting to the point of that alien aspect. And I do find that really, really fascinating. That, again, within the writing, it's all moving parts that seem to fit so well within each other.
And not to jump too far ahead, but the fact that at the end, obviously, like, there's a plot reason why Mulder doesn't bring Scully with him, because he thinks the aliens are gathering up technology, which would include, like, Scully's implant. But it's telling that he brings Skinner with him. That Skinner is the skeptic. Skinner is the doubting Thomas who has to witness the miracle, not Scully. I think that's interesting as well, because that gets to kind of what Cathy's saying, which is Scully doesn't need to see the miracle anymore. She doesn't need to look up at the end of Fight the Future and see the ship rise.
Let's not get involved in that argument again.
Yeah. Before we come back to Mulder and Scully, can we? Because I think one of the times we cut away to the stuff in Tunisia, don't we, with Krycek and Marita? So, Kurt, can you bring me back up to speed here? So, I haven't seen Marita since when? One Son? Is that right?
One Son in the corridor.
Right. And when she was in a pretty bad way at that point, yeah?
Yeah.
And we haven't seen Krycek since the Sixth Extinction trilogy, where he was a minimal presence by the end of that trilogy, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Was that where we last saw him? What was he up to since then?
So it looks like he was in Tunisia, which in itself is an interesting area, because Tunisia is where the domes were in the film, weren't they?
Yeah.
And Tunisia was also mentioned with the people who were around Krycek at the time in the Skinner SR-19 as well.
Okay. Yep.
So there's a tedious link, I'll say. There seems to be a tenuous link between that and what Krycek would have been doing. But it is all off screen. It's not really inferred as such. But there is this kind of something's happening in the background between One Son, SR819, and this episode, where Cigarette Smoking Man's obviously just put Krycek into that prison at some point for selling something that wasn't his. So,
and also brought Marita back into the fold. It seems.
Yeah.
Okay. What do we think of the appearance of these two then? I mean, here and then throughout the episode, because they're interesting in, like, they're symbolic of the past and potentially of the future in some ways, aren't they? Like, they're long-standing characters. They carry their own weight in their own way. At the same time, there's this thing going on with Krycek. There's been suggestions in the past of him as kind of like an heir to the cigarette smoking man's throne kind of thing. And you hear things about the fact that potentially Krycek and Marita might have had a bigger role in season. Well, Krycek comes back in season 8. Marita doesn't come back until The Truth, I think. But potentially at this time, they thought maybe they would have been much more significant going forward. So, yeah, Cathy, are you happy to see those two in this episode?
I'm always happy to see Krycek. Always. I think I like how they brought these two together. They have a past. They're clearly not thrilled to be together, but they recognize that they have to work as allies. I like the fact that they're brought in when CSM says that he wants to rebuild the project, because it gives us the idea that maybe something's going to happen and this is the future. Yeah. So I think they're used very effectively. Like I said, every character that's brought back is used effectively in this episode.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think Marita in particular was never as interesting as when she was paired with Krycek, in my opinion. I didn't really like her in those early informant roles. When you get to sort of Patient X, she becomes a bit more interesting to me, I think. Darren, what do you make of those two?
Again, I think it's one of those things where it's the episode is almost about the drama of like trying to write the episode or trying to like script the episode, trying to figure out what the episode's going to be. Where the core plot is the aliens have come back to Earth and they're gathering up all the evidence of alien contact. And it's like, let's just hoover them all up and take them away because we want this to be done. We are wrapping up. We're closing the show down. We are wrapping up the conspiracy. And like at this point, the mythology, at least in the 7th season, has been treated as a metaphor for like show running, world building, Truman Show-esque stuff. So things like, for example, the cigarette smoking man, like hanging out in what looks like a backlot or studio executive's office in NME, where people are just wandering through wearing like nurses' outfits and kind of, police officer uniforms and stuff like that, as if they're coming to and from a hot set. So I think that like you could argue, if you wanted to very strenuously, that the thing with the gathering up the artifacts within the plot reflects what Carter's doing with the script, which is all these loose ends that I have in terms of mythology, all these things that I haven't resolved. And as you point out, like Marita Covarrubias was meant to be a much bigger part. I think Laurie Holden got a regular role on The Magnificent Seven, the TV show with Ron Perlman and Michael Bain, and therefore was not available as much as they would have liked. Same thing that happened throughout the show where people get cast and therefore unavailable. And Nicholas Lee as well, not always available when they needed him. So it's like we have these two actors who can come back for this. They are part of the show's past. Let's tie them into its present and into its future. And like, not to jump too far ahead, I think it's interesting that the Smoking Man's plan is to keep the X-Files going. It's to rebuild the mythology, rebuild the conspiracy exactly as it was. The cigarette smoking man is going, we can have an 8th season. It'll be just like the 5th season. It'll be fine. We can just keep doing that forever and ever. And I think one of the interesting things about it is that you have like Krycek and kind of Covarrubias going, no, we need to just be done with this. Like we need this to end in some way, in some meaningful way. So I think that's an interesting tension.
Yeah, and just while we're on the theme of those two and the Smoking Man, so they're obviously a big contrast to him as well, aren't they? They're still pretty young and dynamic. The Smoking Man is now in a wheelchair. He looks much worse than he did the last time we saw him. You know, we have noticed that he's been getting, he's in decline this season since that operation. But now his voice is strained. We see him smoking through his throat, don't we? Which that becomes a recurrent sight because he does that as well in The Truth and in the first My Struggle. He's miraculously okay by season 11. We'll talk about that.
It's one of the clones from Redux, I keep telling you.
Yeah, I know. But we got an irony, don't we? Yeah, he's talking about moving forward when he looks in such a, an awful way. I think this is the last time that I really buy the Smoking Man as a convincing character. Like, I enjoy his appearance and his presence in The Truth, but I find it in much more of a campy sort of way there. And then, of course, we get into the revival after he's been, he's been annihilated by missile, and he comes back.
It's amazing what we can do with skin transplants.
But am I alone on this? I just find it becomes increasingly difficult after Requiem to sort of take him seriously. But in this episode, I think he works really well. Cathy, how do you feel?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think he is still, we see him as this desperate man, but he's still got the menacing aspect to him that's believable. Whereas in, later appearances, he's just a cartoon character. I think he's a man who's been on the top and is grasping by his fingertips to stay there, and dangling and ready to be knocked down. I think he's very, very effective in this episode.
Yeah, Darren, would you go along with that? Because I suppose we even have like the scene where he talks to Marita later on, and he's like, "There's no God, Marita. What we call God is only." He's still quite menacing and kind of chilling, isn't he? At this point,
he is, and obviously he's also a fraction of himself. Like again, I would argue, controversially, I quite like some of and I want to be very specific when I say some of the Smoking Man stuff in the revival. My Struggle 2. I like the Smoking Man stuff in My Struggle 2. That is before we get to the revelation that breaks the show, to be absolutely clear. But I do agree. I think he's much better here than he is in The Truth. I think he's much better here than he is in most of the revival as well. I think this is the last time that you can actually see him as a human being. And I think that part of what makes the episode work is that contrast between the idea that he was once this great big Machiavellian figure and how he ultimately dies being thrown down the stairs. And as you point out, this conversation he has, this really menacing conversation about how there is no God and what we call God is just not, that's contrasted with, this once powerful institution has kind of eroded to the point where just a light breeze will knock it over and bring it to an end. Everything ends, even these great powerful things that you imagined would be totemic and would stand forever. And I really like the vulnerability of the character here, as weird as it is to say about one of the great pop culture villains. But again, it fits in that kind of funereal atmosphere that the rest of the episode has, a sense that it's ending, it's over, the curtains are coming down. And even for this character. And again, I like that it's again, myth arc and mythology and all that sort of stuff, but it's not a mythological ending for the Smoking Man. It doesn't feel as big or as important, in inverted commas, as getting burnt alive by a Tomahawk missile. But it instead feels very mundane, very grounded, very intimate, to reuse a word that I've used throughout this kind of discussion. And I think that's to the episode's credit. That it's because the mythology had its big finale in Two Fathers, One Son. Whether or not that was a good finale, whether or not that was a satisfying finale is a matter for debate. But that was the big blockbuster moment. Everything is laid bare. We have the special effects budget to do it on a grand scale. I like that this is no, we're tidying up. We are in the same way the aliens are. We are just wrapping up. And I like that that's what they do with the Smoking Man.
You see, for me, for the Smoking Man, which is why this is probably the best element of him in the embers that are left, is that the
embers,
mythology. That the mythology by the time season 7 begins has completely changed, and he's losing. And I'll use Cathy's term of grasping. He grasps for power at the end, and I know, Darren, that we spoke about that those few words that he said at the beginning of. I think was it in Biogenesis, or was it the Sixth Extinction Part 2 or Part 1, where he's trying to rebuild the whole thing
when he's at that meeting.
When he's in that meeting,
Yeah.
And he's grasping at straws there. And his last big push is to do the experiment, which basically begins his demise. And the fact that he's been grasping for this power, that he's done what he did to Mulder to try and still grasp for power, and this was the ultimate end of it. Because he just was reaching too far to re-keep that power, and it just didn't work. And then obviously, we've got, his he's not unable to do the things he wanted to do. And my final little point is it's also the beginning of this whole he must have a woman that's looking after him aspect, because Greta's in.
Greta.
Yeah. So, this is I don't know what Greta did to him. But she's obviously had a lasting impression. That's all I'm going to say for the rest of his lives.
You're talking about the woman, because he has a woman with him in in that cave in the truth, doesn't he?
Yeah.
And then you're talking about Monica Reyes as well.
So about Monica Reyes, yeah.
I see what you mean.
So.
Like, what I do find interesting,
And even Diana Fowler before then as well, I suppose.
Yeah.
But yeah.
What I do find like really interesting about the 7-season mythology is the idea that it's this zombie mythology. I think we talked about it, where like there is this recurring zombie imagery in the 7th season, like the Millennium episode, like the world will be ended by 4 zombies. Hollywood AD, which is what happens to the zombies after they die. Hungry was originally supposed to be about a zombie. There was supposed to be a Night of the Living Dead episode with Ramiro and Stephen King, and I like that it feels very appropriate. And I know the show goes on, and I know that like. The big reveal is going to be that we're cleaning up the mythology so that we can have a new mythology next year. That'll be very Invasion of the Body Snatchers-esque. But I like that if you don't know that, if this is the final episode of The X-Files, if you are watching it in real time, what you actually get is a very sad story about a bunch of men who thought they could control the world, who thought they had enough power to shape the world to their whims, and having that slip away from them, and then dealing with the aftermath, where realizing that they are completely impotent and they have no power, and their attempt to construct a mythology around themselves, to construct a conspiracy theory where they can rule the world from the shadows, accomplishes absolutely nothing. Cigarette-smoking man is, captain on the Titanic. He's arranging deck chairs on the Titanic. He's just coasting at this stage, waiting for the thing to go down. And I actually find that a really affecting kind of closure to his arc. And I mean, it's not just here, it's arguably a culmination of everything from, as Kurt pointed out, like the ill-advised experimental procedure that he undertook in Amor Fati, the presentation of himself as sick in, is it Closure? Is that the one of the two that he appears in? And then obviously Enemy as well. But I like that he dies by inches, and he dies slowly, and he dies basically reduced to nothing. He is powerless. And I think that's a really fitting ending. And I think it contrasts very nicely with later iterations of the show where Carter, instead of going smaller, instead of whittling the mythology down to scraps and to failure and to graveyards, instead tries to scale it upwards and has it become, I've been controlling everything all along from behind the scenes and have magical access to future technology that means I will outlive God himself. I like the sense of, no, this is just a terminal slow decline. And I think it fits. It has a nice mood to it that I think fits the episode and makes it richer.
Yeah, no, I think of all his demises, I'd say it's in the top half dozen.
I mean, it's no Redux 2, right?
Yeah.
Without Redux 2, you wouldn't have had those clones. Anyway.
Yeah.
Fair point.
All right, so we talked about the idea of things coming into an end potentially, but also the idea of time passing. And I think that's really reinforced, isn't it, when we get Mulder and Scully back in that town where they first investigated a case together. They meet Billy Miles, of course, who I think probably has one of the most unlikely character arcs of anybody in the X-Files, isn't he? So he's in episode 1, comes back 7 years later, and then he becomes an alien replicant in season 9.
I like that you described as one of the most unlikely character arcs in the X-Files, as if characters on LA Law are doing this all the time.
Yeah. But no, it's interesting when they meet him, isn't it? Because he's become a cop. He's had the time not just to get married, but also to get divorced, So that...
He's lived a life.
He's lived a life, and we also later meet Teresa Nemon from the pilot. She's now Teresa Hosey. I mean, some things still stay the same, don't they? Because that actress still can't act to save her life. Sorry. That might just be me.
And that is why the episode lost 1 point from Carl.
So that's why all the additional dialogue are recording when Ray comes back and she's screaming, and it's like, oh my god, that's horrible. That is a moment I don't like.
I've always just found her performance quite cringy. I'm sorry. No, Cathy, what do you make of this? All this stuff back in Bellflower, the sensor coming full set, the X on the road, all of that stuff. It's great, isn't it?
Yeah, I love it because we're back to the beginning, but we see that things have changed. That they haven't stood still. That we've accomplished something. Maybe we've gotten somewhere. You skipped over something that I really love, so I'm going to go back. When they get the call from Billy in the office, and then they decide they're going to go to Oregon. Whole let's go waste some money. I think that's a great character moment between Mulder and Scully. First of all, Scully thought it was hilarious that Mulder assaulted the auditor, and that shows some growth for her. She wouldn't have taken to breaking the rules before. But let's go waste some money, and he chuckles, and he finds it, he's tickled by that. And I really love how it shows the two of them having fun breaking rules together. So I had to get back to that.
Cathy, I know you've seen this episode. I would say more than several times.
At least 42.
Do you ever? Do you ever like, get to that scene and think like, because there's a moment where it's like the overlooking camera shot of Mulder, and Gillian Anderson is not on her box because it's like she's looking at like an 85-degree angle, and then the next scene next to it, then it's all of a sudden back to like sort of the usual view. And I find it really weird because she's looking up at the camera and it's very steep.
I enjoy anything that emphasizes the height difference or draws attention to it. So these are the important things, Kurt.
Well, we've yet to say though that because the birth of the shipping forecast was between me and Darren and Cathy. You're now part of this shipping forecast.
All the little things you're going to overlook because I will never overlook them.
I do like that. Let's go waste some money line now. I think that ties back into what I was saying about Chris Carter's wish fulfillment when he's running that scene.
Absolutely. It's like, let's go shoot on location, baby. Let's move the production team out.
Right.
What do you reckon, Darren? Because we got some really interesting stuff when they're back in Bellflower, don't we? Like I say, obviously meeting Billy and Teresa and everything, but even things like Scully holding the baby as Mulder looks on. Yeah. What jumps out at you about these kind of scenes?
Like, again, that's that sense of, like, again, it's that balance with the whole emphasis on, like, full circle, time travel, time moving backwards kind of thing, which is the idea that while this stuff has been happening, people have been having lives, they've been moving on. 7 years is enough time for a child to, well, as you point out, to get married, to get divorced, to have a child. It is a long time, and the wonderful tension that you get in the X-Files, and again, I don't want to suggest too much into it. I don't know. I just know from reading interviews with a lot of people who work on these sorts of things that, like, when you make a show like the X-Files, particularly where you just have two leads, it's a huge commitment. It is a huge part of your life, and I do wonder if it's like a metaphor for that. It's the idea of, well, while this show was happening, while we were making this, all these people were moving on with their lives, and we were doing this thing week in and week out. And I find something very powerful in that. And obviously there's the implication, very similar to what, like, and again, recurring fixation since the show has moved to Los Angeles in particular. I think of, for example, Dreamland 1, the conversation about, do you ever think of stopping and getting out of the car? Things like Amor Fati, where Mulder's imagining this alternative life where he laid down his burdens and didn't do the X-Files. I think that there is something very powerful there, which is the question of, like, what if Mulder and Scully stop? Because this is, again, as we pointed out, like, it's a funereal episode. Even if you weren't following the behind the scenes drama, the fact that it opens with the threat of shutting down the X-Files again, when you have Scully holding a baby and you have Mulder looking at Scully holding a baby, the audience intuitively and instinctively understands the question there as well. If they're not going to do the X-Files anymore, what are these two people going to do? What is the next step? And what have they given up in order to do this for as long as they have? And I think it's a very effective, very beautiful, very moving image in a way that, like, as we point out, so much of this episode is not overly heavily handed. Like, there are no profound conversations about it. There's no extended kind of like deep dive reflections. There's arguably less about, like, Scully wanting to be a mother here than there is in, say, something like Home, to pick a completely arbitrary example. And I think that it's more powerful for that simplicity. It trusts you as an audience member to understand the context of this and to understand what this means and what this might be saying. I think it's actually really, really emotional and really effective, I think. And I say that as a shipping agnostic on the shipping forecast.
And I have that scene where Scully takes the baby and glances at Mulder a little sheepishly, and then he looks at it. It's so beautifully evocative. The emotions are right there. And I have to say that it really comes down to David and Gillian's wonderful performances there. Having read the script, Scully is told to ad-lib some cooing to the baby. And Mulder is supposed to be affected, but we don't know exactly how. So what we're seeing in their faces and their looks and their glances is just a beautiful performance. And it comes from them knowing these characters after 7 years. And I think it's just a really very affecting moment.
And it's interesting when you go back and rewatch the episode, isn't it? Because, Scully mentions to the auditor, I think, that she was left barren as a result of what happened to her. We get her, like, bouncing the baby. it's quite obvious when you know what's coming at the end of the episode, you can sort of see how it's prepared, can't you? But when I first watched the episode, I remember being like taken aback. It kind of was a real surprise to me back in the day. So I think that's handled quite delicately too, isn't it? Like, do you guys agree?
Yeah, I mean, there were rumors very famously that was a shot or it was last minute inserted, and it was there in the script, and Carter's on record saying it was always the plan. He just had, kept the number of people who knew it relatively small in order to prevent spoiler leaks. But yeah.
Well, I think it was only, from what I read, it was only him, Frank Spotnitz, and then he told
Kim Manners, Gillian, and Mitch Pileggi, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he says that in the making of season 7 documentary that the script was handed out unfinished, and it was only in the last couple of days. I do actually have 2 versions of the ending in the script that I'll talk about when we get to the end. But yeah, the pregnancy he tried to keep that under wraps. So as we're seeing this unfold,
but it is part of the story though. It's nothing that he it's not that he got to the end and realized that he had an 8th season and was stuck it in. It was always there. He just didn't share it, I think. Yeah.
In one of the endings, I'm not sure. I think maybe that was a decoy ending, and he always knew it was coming. But that's how I see it, because it doesn't go back to Scully at all. But it's, as you watch it, knowing the ending, you watch this whole episode and you see, like you said, talking about her. I hate the word barren, but they use it, and then you see her holding the baby, and then Mulder talks about, I saw you hold the baby, and there's more to life than this, and it seems like it's definitely being planted. And of course, all her sickness, her dizziness,
all that stuff. Yeah, I suppose we get distracted by there's kind of a switcheroo of Mulder suddenly being the one in peril. It probably takes the focus off of Scully for a bit. Yeah, maybe that's why it then comes as a surprise.
Yeah, well, you assume that it's something related to the aliens. Again, it's one of those classic TV narrative things where it's you have 2 plot lines happening simultaneously. You assume that they are connected. So Scully has gone back to this place where aliens are gathering up evidence of alien intervention. Scully has an alien chip in her neck. Of course, Scully's going to be acting weird and having weird fits. It's quite a nice bit of writing misdirection.
Weird rapid rush fits as well.
And I know how much you love Rush, Kurt.
Wasn't that your theory, Kurt? That was the fan theory you're trying to get off the ground, isn't it?
It was an alien influence Rush because of what happens here. So
yeah, okay. It is a similar effect, though. You're right. In terms of all the sort of themes they're playing with, I think they come to the fore very nicely in that motel room scene, don't they? Which I think is obviously designed to evoke the pilot. I think it does so in a very clever way. So in the pilot, that's where Scully tells Mulder that she's not a part of the agenda against him, and that's when he opens up to her a bit about Samantha, isn't it? You get a sense there of the roots of their partnership being laid. In this episode, this is where he tells her he wants her to go home, and he talks about how there has to be an end, doesn't he? So again, you can see, Cathy, I think, how a scene like that would function very effectively in a series finale as opposed to a season finale, had it gone that route.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And they tried it again when they got to the truth, but this one, it's just so it perfectly completes the circle from the pilot. Like you said, we're going back. She's concerned about something and goes to his room. You're gonna have to let me ship about this.
Go on, can I just jump in and say something that I like about it? Then I'll give Cathy the floor. Because I need to put my shipping forecast in, don't I? So I need to do this. So the one thing I really like about this, and I don't know if it was directed this way or just happenstance, is the kind of what evoked in me was the photographs and pictures from the pilot when he says, "Oh, look at the photographs and the pictures," and when in this scene the photographs are all on the bed, but he doesn't pay any attention to them whatsoever.
Yeah,
and I think that's really fascinating because he lies on top of it. They're chucking the pictures away, then they kind of cuddle up together. And I don't know if that was directed or not. I probably will never know that, but it felt to me that felt like it was a nice little shift from it's not about that anymore. And which is where my shipping thing clicks in. It's not about that story anymore. It's about those two in this moment. So that is my final shipping forecast of the year, and probably maybe Essence in Existence.
We made it into doc.
Yeah.
I'm so proud of you, Kurt.
I will say, before I cede the floor to Cathy as well, I just want to say I actually really love the fact that the pilot has the really forced intimacy of Scully going into him and having Mulder look for the chip and examine her body, and it turns out, but that's very, and I think when you watch it, there's a real sense of maybe the network watched this and thought it could be sexier and had a note, and so it feels really uncomfortable, really unusual. And it's really nice that this is a much more organic form of intimacy with the two of them, like literally in bed together, but the two of them, just kind of cuddling, enjoying each other's presence in a way that feels natural and comfortable and warm. And I think that's a really good contrast between the two. Sorry, Cathy.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the key, is that this is just natural. This is who they are now. It's not surprising to either of them that she would come to him feeling sick. And the way he tucks her into bed, he takes off her shoes. I have to mention that for Michelle. She would kill me if I didn't say that. He takes off her shoes. This is something they're comfortable with. They've done before. There's no question that she's getting into his bed and he's going to keep her warm. And, then they do have this conversation about the personal costs. And it's a very intimate conversation. And I'll get to that in a minute, but it's the choreography and blocking was clearly worked out by the director, but this was always intended to be a very intimate scene for them. The script has Mulder crawling under the covers with Scully, and then she spooning her, and then at one point she turns over and faces him. And the kiss wasn't scripted, but there was always this was intended as an intimate scene. It wasn't just Mulder, David and Jillian, or it wasn't just Kim Manners. It was always intended to show this shift in their relationship. But then the conversation that he's having, I think, is very interesting to me in light of what we learn in the very next episode, which is the next season. If he's telling her that there has to be an end, is he saying, what exactly is he saying there? Is he saying he's ready to let the X-Files be shut down and walk away with Scully? Or is he telling her to leave the X-Files in him? Is he feeling like...
You mean because he's got brain disease?
If his life is almost over because he's got this brain disease and it's too late for him, but he wants Scully to move on and forget him. And is he pushing her away, or is he saying, let's move on
it's
together?
your life, it's not our lives, that sort of thing, that sort of distinction.
Because he keeps saying, what I saw with you, what you've gone through, your
life,
health, your ability to be a mother, you, and then he says it has to be an end. And at that part, to me, it sounds like he's saying it has to be an end is for both of them together. But if he's thinking he's dying of a brain disease, is he trying to prepare her for that?
I suppose that goes back to Darren's earlier point about how the context of this episode has changed because of
everything,
the decision to go to an 8th season,
everything that comes,
obviously.
Yeah. They might not have known about the brain disease as they were acting.
Yeah,
this.
David Duchovny might
they were
not
writing.
Probably didn't.
Yeah.
As they were writing this. Yeah. So it just because I have to look at the X-Files as an overall story, because that's how I view it. So I'm thinking, what's Mulder's motivation now that I know what happens in season 8?
Fitting it into a holistic picture.
Yeah, because once season 8 exists, you can read it that way as a continuous thing that can be seen as a whole.
Yeah, I think you have to.
I don't think you have to. I think because...
You don't have to. Some people don't, but I think if season 8 exists, and it does, then Mulder had this brain disease that he was aware of as at the time when he's telling Scully there has to be an end. The personal costs to you are too high. Maybe he's already written himself off.
I think that's something I absolutely love about this episode, is that it exists in that way that is almost, again, very postmodern, very perfectly X-Files-y, which is the idea of, like, the X-Files is about trying to impose meaning and trying to make sense of a world that is chaotic and arbitrary and random. That whole mythology thing, where the conspiracy theory just explains how everything fits together, and it's a way of making sense of a world that is often senseless. And I really like that, like, because of the coincidental factors that are like surround Requiem as a piece of television that was like written, produced, edited, and broadcast, and then released on DVD in very radically different circumstances. And so its meaning changes in each of those contexts. And like, so as you point out, like the context for David Duchovny filming that scene is probably Duchovny's like, I am never going to be Fox Mulder again. I'm going to, I'm suing Fox at the moment. I'm going to, go transition into a film career. I'm never going to play this role again. The transition of like everybody editing it is like, well, I guess the show is over and done with. We're moving on. The meaning for like the people watching it the day that it's broadcast is like, oh my God, this is coming back, which we only found out 3 days ago. And I love that, like it is this object that exists, and we impose me. And again, this is the thing that I think kind of, Carl mentioned there, which is the idea, like, how we view the episode and kind of like how we make sense of the episode and how we understand the episode. But the idea that it's constantly, it's a living document, and the fact that it displays to kind of Carter's strengths as the thing that I really like is the ambiguity. It's not an answerable thing, and that's what I love about it. Sorry.
Well, and it changes in other ways too, doesn't it? Because like most people sitting down to watch Requiem in 2000 may not have seen the pilot for a long time if they had seen it at all. If they had seen the pilot back in 1993, they would have watched it in the squarer aspect ratio, things like that. So like these days, you can watch the pilot, then watch Requiem, and you'll see them both in widescreen because the pilot has been rejigged around, you know? So yeah, no, I think that's interesting how the context changes.
I mean, I've just a very quick one on this, because I think the very nature of TV shows that I've watched since the X-Files is because of the X-Files that sometimes when things are not neatly tied up in a bow that I don't like it. and I think it's because of the X-Files, I like that chaotic that aspect. I like the fact that we can infer different meanings from different things. I love the fact that I can speak to Cathy and we both disagree about things vehemently, like we have done. You know, but I also love the fact that we can come together and like see something the same way. And I don't think you can do that. And I think
with a lot of shows,
with a lot of shows, and the X-Files is the reason why that happened.
And the fact, like the show's about that, and the fact it exists at a point where TV as a medium is going from being like a liminal thing that's just broadcast once and then maybe airs in syndications and reruns, but is largely forgotten about, to something that becomes a more permanent document that is being taken seriously through like DVDs of seasons being released, which, as Carl points out, allow you to go back and rewatch them and to recontextualize and to kind of make sense. I just like, that's one of the things I love about the X-Files as a show, is that it exists in the midst of this kind of maelstrom of figuring out what TV is and what TV means, and how making TV is different from making films, but is also quite similar to making films, and how a work of art exists both in the moment it's created and also in like eternity and posterity. And I think Requiem is the perfect storm of all of that stuff. Sorry, this is me probably disappearing up various parts of my anatomy, but it is something I unequivocally love about this episode of television.
I just wanted to point out that because we've been talking about the intimacy of this motel room scene, so I think it's quite funny, that line at the very beginning of the episode where Mulder says to the auditor that potentially they could start to share rooms. That was funny. We forgot to mention that.
Very detoury, very
exactly.
detour.
All right. Is there, help me out, is there some fuzziness in the plotting of this episode? I'm trying to work this out. I'm still not sure I can tell you exactly what Krychek is up to all the time here. So
no good is the answer.
The cigarette smoking man.
I have that.
The cigarette smoking man has faith in Krychek finding the ship, but won't tell him exactly how to do so in case he sells the information. Then later, Krychek does indeed go to Mulder with some information, and then at the end, the smoking man seems to suggest that Krychek has screwed Mulder over. So, what's your read on what Krychek's up to here? Can we ascertain that, or is it just a bit nebulous?
It is a bit nebulous, if I'm being honest. Because there's also another thing which I failed to mention. You brought this up, is when Mulder talks to Billy Miles. There's a conversation where that Mulder's looking for the deputy, but then cigarette smoking man saying, "Find the deputy, find the ship," but Mulder's looking for the ship, not the deputy. And I find that quite an interesting like mirror image of stuff. I think it seems like to me that it's almost like the very nature of Krychek. There's almost something missing where it's like it's riled Krychek up so much that he's just gone, look, I've had enough of this. I've had enough of him, and I'm just going to sort this out. That's the only way I can describe it. Is that I think Smoking Man is right though to do this. So he's got to find his own way. I've done that with people in the past. You've got to live in a person's shoes to understand what it's like. You know, if I'm trying to get money for something, you know, for example, and I'm like, right, well, you need to stand in my shoes to understand what the problems are in my world. And there's an element of that. But what happens in the middle of all of it when he's sitting outside of... And I was thinking, does Krychek just like randomly just wander around and says, oh, Scully and Mulder are in bed together again? And I wonder if that was... Has he got his own little diary?
Yes, he does.
Lots happened while I've been in a Tunisian prison, it turns out.
But I do like that. I do actually like that juxtaposition of like we get that really intimate scene and we flip to a natural kind of standard X-File of of him standing there looking afar from them, and you can imagine that Krychek's probably thinking, are they getting it on? Or is Mulder just like sort of rhyming off all the possibilities of this UFO?
Yeah.
I don't know.
The other thing, does anyone have an answer to exactly what Krychek,
Well, Cancerman tells him you need to find the ship. To possess the ship is the answer to all things. So he sent their Krychek to find the ship. I just don't know what he's supposed to do with it. How is he supposed to capture this ship? It's Krychek versus a spaceship, and that's enough.
Well, a one-armed Krychek
really
as well,
is my only problem.
Very...
Oh, he's not entirely unarmed, to be fair.
Right.
Yeah, he's not unarmed, though.
Just one arm.
He's not unarmed.
Very disarming conversation.
But so, yeah, I mean, that really is my only problem with Requiem. It's like, this doesn't make sense. It doesn't.
So, in fact, I'll throw that in as well with the alien bounty hunter, right? How does that fit? How does he fit in?
Well,
why is he gathering?
The thing I didn't understand about that is that the alien bounty hunter posing as Detective Miles is a much more convincing fake human than the alien bounty hunter posing as the fake deputy, Ray.
Yeah. They've got to be two different people. They have to be two different
bounty hunters. The rookie. That
one is like the non-communicative one, and one is more like social one.
just taking every time he comes to Earth, he makes sure to have the coffee because he hears it's great here. That sort of thing.
Maybe they took criticism over that element, and that's why we get all of them in without potentially.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, like the answer that I always going to take to what the hell is Krychek doing here? It's like pretty much the idea that Krychek is always the wild card in terms of like writing your X-Files episode. His job is to be fundamentally untrustworthy and unreliable. And if you want to explain it in universe and in terms of character, like Krychek has always been the other son to Mulder. Like I would argue the thing about Covarrubias and Krychek, and it's not really used here, but I think it works really well in, say, The Red and the Black, is that they are like dirty, sexy, like Mulder and Scully. Is basically what they're meant to be. Krychek is always like the off-brand Mulder. He's always the cheap equivalent. He's the cigarette-smoking man's other son, outside of the other son that the cigarette-smoking man has. But like he's the one who always has the inferiority complex. So in terms of like understanding his characterization here, it's like, okay, well he's gonna kill his dad, classic Oedipal stuff, and he's going to get rid of his brother because that's the other thing that he needs to do. And that just sums up kind of Krychek's character arc at this point in the show, the nihilistic burn it all down stuff. But I do also think he serves the plot function, again, mirroring the alien bounty hunter, mirroring what the script needs the characters to do, of just tidying up all of the loose ends. Like at this stage, Krychek arguably always been the most pragmatic of the conspirators. Like right there in Two Fathers, One Son, he's the one who realizes that it's all going pear-shaped and gets the hell out of there as quickly as possible. Here, it's like, no, this is all just going to end. I just need to tidy this stuff up and just wrap up all the loose ends and get my end out of it. And I do think that makes a reasonable amount of sense, where it's like, okay, for the X-Files to end, the cigarette-smoking man has to die, and Mulder has to like have a resolution of some kind. So my plot function here is to do that. And that's what I'm going to do. In a very 6 characters in search of an ending kind of reading of the episode.
Just quickly on the stuff I was saying with the fake deputy. Like, was it just me that chuckled at the fact that obviously he returns to his wife, she stabs him, blah, blah, blah. Then in the very following scene, they take great pains to make sure we know that baby is fine, because somebody very ostentatiously carries it out to the crime scene. I was laughing at that.
Carries the baby out.
I suppose that was nice and reassuring, wasn't it? Can we talk a bit about getting the gang back together stuff? Because we obviously get a bit of a time jump that we to the FBI building a couple of days after Billy goes missing, I think it is. I love the fact that Skinner has that whole conversation with Mulder while Krychek and Marita are waiting outside. I think that's brilliant.
I love that.
But it's a great moment when they appear. But
do you wonder, like, are Krychek and Marita kind of bickering about when to come in? Like, is Marita like, this is just awkward now? And Krychek's like, no.
She's going, shh, shh, shh. Doesn't know we're here yet.
Yeah.
Like a reverse surprise party.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, now the mood of the room has changed entirely.
I think it works because it obviously brings Skinner in, doesn't it? And we get a nice interaction between Mulder and Skinner.
My question is, like, how did the Krychek and Skinner thing come together? Because Marita must have got involved before.
Yeah,
it's got to be Marita that's brought Krychek in. Well, because he's under control, isn't he still?
Oh, the nanobots, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
Which I'm kind of glad that they kind of like steer clear of explicitly mentioning and explaining.
Didn't talk about that.
Yeah.
Which again speaks to the simplicity of it. It's like it's there if you want it to be, but it's also not something that we need to burden this episode with in its final 10 minutes.
In my head, Skinner's just going, right, well, he's not threatening me today, so I'm in a good place.
It's interesting to hear Krychek start to parrot some of the Smoker Man's language, isn't he? Because he uses the phrase singular opportunity, which had been earlier on.
Yeah.
I also love the moment when Scully turns up late and there's like, what? Cathy, what do you make of all this stuff in the office? You know?
Okay, so I think that Mulder's his come in Walter set a spell.
Oh yeah.
And playing with the basketball, he got his feet up on the desk. I think it shows that he's clearly thinking. He spent the last 2 days, because we have a time jump, thinking, okay, I'm done. We're just wrapping things up. I'm going to pack up the office and leave. And then Skinner comes in and brings in Krychek and Marita and tells him you have a singular opportunity. The abductees are being gathered up, but they're not gone yet. And Mulder thinks, okay, here's my chance to save him. I can do one more thing. And then that's my singular opportunity. I'm going to save these abductees. That's been my purpose for years. I can do that and then walk away from the X-Files. I really like how we see him at the start of the scene as clearly checked out, but then he's energized by the end. And I do love when Krychek walks in and Mulder has to be restrained from pounding him again. I think that's
his response. His response to the singular opportunity line, where it's like, "Here, or you want to step outside?"
Right.
I do find I absolutely adore Mulder's reaction when he sees it, because it's like there's a lot of like hurt there as well. There's a lot of is the way he kind of like he's in shock. He's like surprised. He doesn't know what to feel, and then obviously turns quickly into anger. I think it's one of my favorite moments of Mulder. The micro expressions that he does in that 2 or 3 seconds.
Yeah, no, it probably does. It's like a real jolt when Krychek and Marita walk in. I love it. Yeah. Cathy, in the script, does the following scene, which is the Last Supper, suddenly the lone gunmen are there as well. Does the script refer to the Leonardo da Vinci painting in terms of we want it like this?
It does. It says that we have them all lined up on one side of the table, a la Da Vinci's Last Supper, with Mulder in the position of Christ. Very clearly sets that up. You're supposed to see that.
Excellent.
And then Scully is in the position of Judas. I don't think the script says that, but that's what we get from where she is, and the fact that they're saying what has to be done, and then
of course the reference to Amor Fati.
I was going to say she was in that position in Amor
exactly.
Fati.
She was the Judas in the kind of in the Last Temptation version.
Yeah. That stuff's great fun, I think, and really popular judging just by the mailbag stuff that's come in. A lot of people single out that scene as being a highlight.
Right.
I think just the thrill of getting loads of people together in one room.
Well, it's a good, like, again, has that kind of like final season, final episode kind of vibe to it. It's we got there is absolutely no reason why you need the lone gunman here. This episode has enough guest stars in it. It has enough continuity in it. It has enough of these characters in it. But bringing the lone gunman into it really adds a kind of a mythic weight to it, and also adds a sense of, well, maybe this is the end of the show, because we do love these characters and this is a good way to say goodbye to them, even though they're not adding anything in terms of plot. I mean, obviously they do a bunch of techno-babble, but you could write the scene without requiring any of that whatsoever. And I think that it does add a sense of that finality to it. And again, as you alluded to, the rather subtle, nuanced religious symbolism at play here. But the fact that it is... Well, first of all, the fact that it is a shot composed for widescreen, which is very cinematic and very nice, but also the fact that it is, again, that religious imagery and the idea that it sets up the Last Supper. And even if you're not going to read the whole Mulder as Jesus thing, the idea of finality there, the idea that this is the end of a journey and this is the last time these characters are all going to be together like this, is quite powerful. And again, suggested not through dialogue, but suggested through imagery, and trusting the audience to read both the language of the scene in terms of like basic television production, as we mentioned, bringing in the lone gunman, which makes it a big deal by default, but also the kind of like the drawing on Christian iconography and understanding that, if you're invoking the Last Supper, it generally suggests that it's going to be the last something. And I think that works very, very well, and it's done very efficiently. Again, this is a reasonably tightly constructed episode of television.
Yeah,
I think in terms of pacing, it gets a lot of stuff done very quickly, and never feels like it's rushing. Sorry.
What I find fascinating, again, going back to Cathy's point with the stuff that happens after this event, that we didn't know season 8 was coming in, that you do get threads of, like Gary, for example. So,
oh, you mean Gary and Richie?
Gary and Richie. Yeah.
We've skipped over them. But yeah.
And then I suddenly realised today, I don't know why I've never picked it up. It's the guy from American Pie, isn't it? Eddie K. Thomas.
Yeah.
And obviously Judd Tritcher, who plays Richie, comes in later on. But you got the Lone Gunman in the next 2 episodes actually are needing to use all this stuff that they've had in the Last Supper to try and find Mulder. Yeah. So it's I know that's more of a pragmatic, writing approach. But it's interesting that even there's room for manoeuvre in later, and you can view it in a different way after the fact. But that doesn't negate what you're saying, Darren. Like I said before, like we've said, it's kind of like, at the time it was written that way, and to bring the Lone Gunman in, it was probably happy circumstance that they did.
Yeah.
Is there more shipping forecast to be had from this sequence? Because I'm thinking not
until they step into the hallway.
That's what I meant. Scully leaves the room. This is where he doesn't want her to go, does he? He doesn't want her to go back out there because they're taking abductees. She was an abductee,
right? Yeah, he hasn't figured out that she's an abductee, and he's not going to risk losing her.
They hug. I believe.
It's interesting that the script has additional dialogue, and it shows Scully going from not knowing whether to be angry or hurt, and then realizing what Mulder's saying. But I think they get all of that from the tighter scene. They cut the dialogue and you still see it from the performance. And it's really, really lovely that I'm not going to risk losing you, and I won't let you go alone. And it's just absolute perfection.
Really good stuff.
Take a moment.
Yeah. And while the upshot is that Mulder goes out there with Skinner, doesn't he? And Skinner gets an absolutely classic Skinner line. Like, if this had been the series finale, I love the fact that one of the last things Skinner would have said would have been, "My ass is on the line here too, Agent Mulder." I just think that's genius.
I also like Skinner's earlier, like, "they like me" comment as well, when it comes to like explaining why he's not in any trouble for all the crap Mulder's pulled. It's like, no, I'm personable.
What do you make of all this stuff out like in the woods, Darren? And because some of it seems reminiscent of stuff like Fallen Angel to me. We obviously got that whole energy field thing going on. I think, was it Kurt? Was it you who used the word ethereal? I think earlier, wasn't it?
Yeah.
This sequence definitely turns ethereal, doesn't it? Like when Mulder ends up with the group of people, the Mark Snow's music. The ethereal is the word I would use. I think it's a great sequence.
Just purely on the fact that those abductees have probably been standing in stasis or time locked for about 4 or 5 days now.
I've never thought about that. That's a good point.
They're all smiling as well. Like, again, it's very much fitting with that kind of religious imagery and iconography. We mentioned like the Last Supper, the fact that you had like closure earlier in the season, which is basically Samantha was abducted by angels. The idea of like ghosts and children's and transcendence and all that sort of stuff happening as well. Like, it's notable that when Mulder joins the abductees, they are not like screaming in agony. They are not emotionless. They are not frozen or horrified. And again, given what we will see happen to them in literally the next episode, what we will see happen to Mulder in literally the next episode, it's quite a striking contrast. But there is a sense of zen or peace to it. Like, there's a sense of this is perhaps a good ending for Mulder, because Mulder is a man who's always been searching for the truth. And we talked about this, I think, particularly with regards to the 6th and 7th season, the question of like what the truth actually is for Mulder, because it doesn't seem like the truth was like the same sense that we look at explaining the mythology of the show. Like, what happened after Two Fathers, One Son? Did Mulder submit a report and was that it? Did he like try and take it public? Did he show the press? The show never really went into that. And you had that conversation in Biogenesis where Scully's like, yeah, what now? What are you still looking for? What truth are you searching for? And even after Samantha's gone, that kind of question of like, is the truth still out there? What truth is it? And it feels like this is the logical culmination of that from an existential or spiritual sense, where Mulder like has spent his life chasing this stuff and looking for these answers. For Mulder to experience that firsthand, for Mulder to be abducted, for Mulder to have that encounter with the unknown, feels in some ways like a kind of a spiritual conclusion for the show. It feels like a logical endpoint for the character, for rather than just observing or chasing this phenomenon, to actually live it. Feels in some ways like this would be an appropriate place for Mulder to end, maybe. I think.
Except, I sort of get what you mean about the sense of Zen at first. I think it's a great sequence because it combines that sense of it being kind of awesome and awe-inspiring. Yeah. Is it just me that gets a bit of a jolt of terror when this alien bounty hunter turns up?
No, it definitely changes.
Yeah,
like feeling it does, and even the music plays it, doesn't it? It's got ding, and as if it's like, all right, we've got to feel that, and you're going from like the end of closure, kind of,
because
like,
it feels very overwhelming, doesn't it, when he gazes up at the ship and all of that, and
then all of a sudden you get that flip. It's quite jarring.
It is for us, but Mulder's face doesn't have that big reaction that I was expecting. He's sort of in a trance this whole time, and I have to wonder, is he willingly going to be abducted? Is he being drawn in, or is his mind controlled in some way? Because when he sees the alien bounty hunter, he does not have that big reaction that we as the audience.
It's not like Red in the Black or Patient X, where you hear the screaming and you see the faces change.
Yeah.
I have a take on. I wonder, like, this is the thing where the show draws so much from 70s cinema. I do wonder if what they're doing here is something riffing on Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where you have Close Encounters of the Third Kind, is obviously it's about a father who basically leaves his family to go get abducted by aliens. And like Spielberg has talked in the years since how he would probably change that ending now as he got older and as he's become a father himself. He would not be so flippant about the idea of a man leaving his family behind to go explore the universe with aliens. And I do wonder if maybe they're playing with that in Requiem, where like Mulder is experiencing this thing, which is the culmination of, in some sense, what he thinks he's been looking for his entire life and career. But in doing so, he is leaving behind his family. He is leaving behind Scully. And is that contrast that Carl mentions between, everybody being abducted looks really happy and really warm and really friendly and at peace, with the realization for the audience that, oh no, the murdering alien bounty hunter has just shown up. Is that a way of generating or playing with that same tension where it's like, is this an attempt to do a Close Encounters of the Third Kind sort of ending while acknowledging what I think, Spielberg has acknowledged in hindsight about that ending being rather dark and grim and depressing? The best of both worlds.
Even the alien bounty hunter almost has this look of,
as much as Brian Thompson can,
kind of reached it. Yeah. Well, yeah.
I love the alien bounty hunter, but yeah.
But it just kind of like, it's almost that acknowledgement of like, Mulder, you've come to the end of your journey.
Here's your executive washroom pass.
Yeah. But as I say, it's more the fact that it's from an audience perspective. It feels like it goes like to that out of time kind of thing. It feels like you're looking in on that rather than being with Mulder. You kind of like, it seems like you're not really with that scene. It's a bit weird, but I quite like it. But it's just
I love it, and I think that kind of like off-kilterness is deliberate and intentional, and ambiguous. And I know, obviously, we know from like we have seen the 8th season. We know that this isn't going to be as warm and friendly as it like looks there. But I think even as Carl points out, like watching it at the time, it is uncanny. It is uncomfortable. It is like nightmarish as much as it is dreamlike. But I do think that there's an interesting tension there.
Yeah, no, I don't know about the Close Encounters thing. I didn't think about Close Encounters, but it seems plausible, doesn't it? Given
how much the show owes
Spielberg as a touchstone in the past and that kind of thing. Yeah. I think the other thing about that whole sequence is I love Skinner watching the ship leave. I think it's a great moment. It all feels very epic, doesn't it, as well? And it sets up what he says to Scully, of course, later, which is really nice.
And he didn't have to trek to the Arctic and like fall asleep. He just
yeah. It all comes thick and fast, doesn't it, at the end of the episode? I mean, we've talked a bit about the cigarette smoking man's second death already. Obviously, it's interesting that he knows it's coming, doesn't he? You know, because what does he say? Like the hour is at hand or something. Yeah.
As you do to Mulder, as you do to Mulder, and to me, you do to all of mankind.
Right. Can you just break that down for us, Kurt, for those who are not fully up to speed with the mythology? What exactly is he saying?
This is the thing with the element of like sort of if you're going through it logically or pragmatically, is that he's basically saying, right, so we had a chance to rebuild this, and it's almost like a last grasp for him, like we said before, like Cathy said before. But it feels like it's like, as you do to Mulder, right? Because you're damning Mulder, Mulder's gone, and you're now going to kill me, but you're actually killing mankind because we're the last best hope. Because the aliens are just going to come and do their thing in 2012 anyway, no matter what. But they were going to do that in the 40s and the 70s. It was only we forestalled alien colonization because we decided to make them alien human hybrids. So the actual general overview of the entire show is still happening, but it just seems, and it always seems like, and it goes to what Darren was saying about this episode, is that it puts all of that to the back, and just uses one or two words here or there just to say, oh, all of mankind. Well, what does that actually entail? And I think it's the right thing to do not to get into depth on that. But it's like there's comments like that, and you're like, right, okay.
It's also a very cigarette-smoking man response to I'm being thrown down the stairs. It's like, well, look, you are dooming mankind. You have killed everyone. Just let you know.
But of course, he says, like, we failed, and perhaps you were never meant to succeed. I was like, what?
I do love the idea that he's just making this up as he goes along. I also love the idea that him not telling Krychek how to find the ship is Chris Carter withholding the last scene from everybody working on the production. It's like, you haven't told them where the episode's going to end. It'll be fine. They have to get there themselves.
In terms of, we talked a little bit about seeing the series as a whole now when you get season 8, 9, 10, 11. And I always loved this moment of Krychek shoving the smoking man down the stairs, the kind of the brutality of it. But I think when you see the series as a whole, you have to just think now, well, this is nowhere near sufficient. You need to do something much more definitive than this, clearly. I still think it remains a great scene to watch, though, doesn't it?
Yeah, I'd still say that missile needed to be nuclear, not just a normal standard missile.
Like the way that Carl says that, like, what more could Krychek do that would, like, Krychek could have set him on fire, like, ground up the ashes and spread it to the four corners of the globe, and, like, it would still not be sufficient. I feel like there's nothing Krychek could have done. I feel like just tossing him down the stairs is good enough for a Friday evening.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Kathy, what would you have done?
Yeah.
How would I have done how would I send the devil back to hell?
Yeah.
I clearly that wasn't enough.
Do you wish they'd have left it here with the Smoky Man Kathy? I mean, like we said, maybe.
You know what's interesting? In this script, it says, "Is he dead?" One would think so from Greta's shriek. So it's clear it was written to be ambiguous whether he's really going to die. I wouldn't think pushing him down the stairs and walking away would be sufficient. It doesn't seem like that's quite enough. I think maybe a gun. I don't know.
Yeah. I suppose given his diminished state, he's supposed to, like.
Especially because he must have been sent in armed for the original alien ship that he's unarmed at this point.
Right.
Okay.
Like
I say, I think it's a great scene.
I like the patheticness of it. Like that's the thing, is that, like, I feel like it feels so small and intimate and almost kind of domestic.
That's a good point.
Where it's like, he's an elder relative. He's the father being thrown down the stairs. It's the son basically saying, "I've had enough of this, Dad," and kind of tossing him down the stairs and saying, "I'm done. We're all out. We're done. We're wrapping up here. Good luck. Enjoy your future. We'll see you back in the end of season 9." That sort of thing. Right. And it makes you wonder, did Krychek go there with the plan to kill him? Because if he did, he didn't. I mean, it was his plan always, I'll just push the wheelchair down the stairs.
Well, this is Krychek we're talking about, though, isn't it, really?
Level of sophistication. It's like, I love the idea of, like, Maria and Krychek just spitballing it. It's like, okay, so what if we push him down the stairs? Okay, what if he slipped in the shower? It's like, okay, no. What if we just rolled him into traffic?
Do you know what, right? So I remember when I first saw this scene, I was like, I'm waiting for season 8. I think I've talked about this on the podcast before at some point, that I was really, like, looking forward to seeing, I think Marita and Krychek, I'm going to love to see them in series 8 if they're going to go down that route. And I know it was briefly discussed. And I was like, it'd be really interesting to see what they do with those two characters moving forward. And now I'm just thinking of the other version of it, almost like a lone gunman version of it, where they're trained assassins and they never actually kill anyone.
Things are suddenly taking a bit of a morbid turn here, haven't they?
Yeah.
So let's talk about Scully and Skinner in the hospital. I think it's a great scene. Skinner, very emotional. Moving. Scully has already heard about Mulder, of course. Skinner says what he saw he can't deny. it's a beautifully played scene, I think, Kathy, isn't it? Like Scully's tearful too. Well, she has conflicting emotions as it plays out, obviously, but really well done.
Yeah, she's laughing and crying at the same time, and I think Skinner is fantastic in this. The emotions it's overcoming him for having lost Mulder, and seeing something he never thought he'd see, and having to just take the stand. I will tell them. I'll tell them. I won't deny it. I think it's really, really well done.
And what I think as well, it's the way it builds up to it as well at the beginning, where he's like he needs to tell Scully, but she already knows, and his tension of like, well, and Scully is the one that has to say, look, I already know, and just love the way that Mitch Pileggi plays that entire scene when he says I lost him. It's very emotional, and I think it's one of his best moments by far.
Well, even down to when Scully says that she's pregnant, and you see Skinner's mouth kind of tighten. That's a great bit of acting too, I think. Darren, what's your reading it all? And of course, the big reveal is the pregnancy, of course.
Yeah, no, it's a great little scene, and again, a great little sequel hook. And I wonder, like, if it would have been like a closing image for the show as well. Like, would you have seen pitches for like X-Files babies, where Mulder and Scully's daughter or son have to pick up 15 years later, and we can do it without bringing back Duchovny or Anderson, or bring back just one of them if we need to in order to spin off the show. I do wonder how different the show would have been if the curtain came down, like, at this point, and how different the future or revival would have been building off that ending as a hook. Because it does feel, weirdly enough, like this is a much more open ending than like The Truth Was, for example, or even I Want to Believe, or even My Struggle For, because it's like, if you cut here, you can jump forward any amount of time and pick up and have had anything happen in the interim, to accommodate for any number of production realities or any number of creative choices you want to make. So I find that interesting as well. But it is a really good, really powerful scene. It feels earned, both in terms of the long-running arc of the show, what this episode has done, as we pointed out, in terms of like seeding Scully's, interest in babies, the idea of like whether or not she can have a life outside the FBI, what life is like after the X-Files. Because even if this was the end of the show, and again, I'm on record, I am not overly fond of the Scully wants a baby plot line. I found that quite reductive in terms of, the interest the show has in Scully's maternity around about the 4th and 5th season. I found that quite forced, and I didn't think it fit with earlier interpretations of the character. But I think that by this stage, it is so kind of baked into who Scully is and what the show is about in terms of being about family, that it kind of makes sense as a culmination of her character arc. That it's like, well, this is something that has defined the character at this stage in the show's run. So it feels like this would be a fitting place to leave Scully as the show had written her to this point, I think. I say, while having qualms with how we got here, to hedge my bets.
And it works really well here, doesn't it? Like, we were talking earlier about how they're priming you for this, but you don't necessarily realize it the first time round. But sometimes, isn't there the idea that a really satisfying dramatic revelation is something that you already know, but don't realize that you already know? So like, it kind of makes sense when she says it here. You're like, of course.
Everything makes sense. And it makes sense, like, not only in terms of like obvious seating, like Scully not feeling well earlier in the episode, it also makes sense thematically in that, like, this is where this episode has been pushing us. So I think it's a good ending. I think it's a good twist. I think it's a good cliffhanger for the next season of the show. I think it's a good segue into a series of films. I also think that if this was the last bit of the X-Files we ever saw, it would be satisfying, or at least an intriguing jumping off point for talking about what happened afterwards. I would imagine the fan fiction and fan debate after this would be very interesting. So I think I like this as an ending, I have to say.
Yeah, I think it's really amazing how well it works on any of those possible outcomes. And it turned out to be a perfect lead into season 8, which was a very good season. I mean,
I think we all like season 8 here, don't we?
I think it was really an amazing ending. I have, like I've said before, I have 2 different versions of the script, and one of them, it's marked final, and it takes us all the way into the hospital room, and Scully says, "We'll find him. I have to," and that's it. There's no pregnancy reveal.
Yeah.
And I think that was just
a red herring.
Carter wasn't revealing that.
Yeah.
The other was a completely different ending. It doesn't include a hospital scene at all. So there's no follow-up to Scully passing out in Skinner's office. The final scene is aboard the spaceship, and it has Mulder lying on a table. We see a man in his early 60s approach, and Mulder realizes it's his father, recognizing him after all these years. And the man says, "Fox, son, we have much to discuss." Mulder gets up and they walk off into the light, and the screen goes black and it says "to be continued." So I think it's my opinion that was a decoy.
Yeah, it sounds awful.
Really, we're going to do that.
Would we have gotten Donna back for that?
Because they do have the.
Yeah.
Would they have got Peter Donna back for that? Given that, like, he didn't come back for the last temptation of Mulder.
Yeah, right. But yeah, so I think that was. There's no way they were actually going to ever consider that. They just needed a placeholder. Yeah. Because they did. They let us know that Scully was pregnant all throughout the episode, even though we didn't, like Carl said, it hits us as a new revelation, and then we realized, oh yeah, we knew that. Yeah. So I think I like having that in writing and seeing it, but I'm pretty sure it was never actually intended as the end.
I do hope that, like, Carter sat, the production team down, and they said, like, look, I would have told them beforehand, but if I told them, they'd be tempted to sell the information.
That's nice.
Right, I won't ask you all for final thoughts just yet, because I think there are some interesting things that will crop up when we go through a few of these mailbag comments. So I propose that we head over to the mailbag right now. Okay, we'll start with Tony Black. Tony says, "It probably would have benefited being a two-part story, to be honest, but Requiem is a really fine season finale, not so much series finale, as a lot of it feels like it was written potentially to be, much as I enjoyed a circularity with the pilot. But after a season and a half of a running-in-place mythology, this is equivalent to a myth-arc party. It works really hard in pulling together what feels like a dozen or more threads, reviving old favourites and providing even deeper closure to what seasons 6 and 7 have already been steadily ramping down. It's really fun, ambitious, self-aware, and in some ways galling, given the two seismic cliffhangers it throws on at the end, but I always find it immensely watchable, a strong end to an underrated season." The thing I wanted to pick up from there was the idea of it probably would have benefited it being a two-part story. I've never felt that watching this episode, because it hurtles through a lot of stuff, but in a way that feels really satisfying to me. Does anyone want to agree with Tony?
Let the record show that all three heads shook simultaneously. I don't want whoever answers that to feel like they're getting thrown under the bus. But yeah, all three heads shook simultaneously when that comment was read. Sorry, Tony.
Yeah,
I think it's just tight. It's the way it's written. It's so tight. I don't think it needs any padding. I think it's really good as it is.
I also suspect, based on Chris Carter's history, and I say this as somebody who loves a lot of Chris Carter's writing, I suspect if you extended this out to 2 episodes, you would end up with a lot of unnecessary stuff in there that would make it more convoluted than it needs to be, and would probably add a lot more exposition, a lot more voiceover, a lot more heavy-handedness to it. And I think the economy of it is a large part of why it works as well as it does. At least for me, that would be my observation on that.
Kathy, you're nodding as well. You go along with that?
No, I absolutely agree. I think this was perfect. Cool. 10 out of 10.
Cool. Christian Ponce says, "It is my ideal ending for the series, almost an open-ended coda, but in which both protagonists complete their destinies and searches for better or for worse. I totally love the scene where almost the entire cast is gathered around the desk in Skinner's office with the Chinese food and the maps. It is, for me, one of the 5 most iconic images of the series." Yeah, almost the entire cast. We didn't get like Chuck Burks in there. Maybe somebody was missing.
Well, I was actually thinking that, like, as I was saying the lone gunman, I was thinking, you could have Chuck Burke come in and do most of that exposition.
Could we have like Peter Donat above them all, just like hovering over the top of them?
Adam Silva says, "Possibly the last great individual episode of the show, and I say this as someone who loved season 8. Definitely the best mythology episode since season 5. Of all the show's potential series finales, this is the best one. But I wouldn't have wanted it to end on a cliffhanger." The last great individual episode of the show, I mean, I would certainly make a case for Roadrunners.
Yeah.
Possibly something like This Is Not Happening.
Those are the 2 I jumped to. I'd also possibly go to, from the revival, the 2 Tara Morgan episodes. I would probably give one to. I quite like, is it Followers? Is that what it's called? The one that's written in binary code?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, that feels really mean to every other episode apart from those 5. But yeah, those would be...
Well, I think I know what he's saying, in that he's saying like season 8's a very good season, but maybe doesn't
the
quite hit the
episodes.
highs of something. That's what he's saying, I think, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I'm thinking of there's episodes in season 8, and I'm going to say season 9, because I actually really think Audrey Paul is a fantastic episode. I think it's but yeah, he's got a point in that it's hard to rhyme them off. Yeah. This is not happening, as you say. I think it's a fantastic episode as well. So I wouldn't necessarily say it's the last great one. I mean, Lost Head of Forward Sweat as well for me. I think that's definitely up there. So yeah, but I can see his point, and from a mythology point of view, it would be hard to argue against it. This is not happening. Fantastic. I'm not sure if it would reach this level ish around there somewhere.
Well, Cathy, you've already done the hard work of ranking all the episodes, haven't you, and rating them. So would you ever go as high as a 10 out of 10 again after Requiem?
No, I don't think so. Well, not after Requiem. Nothing that took place after Requiem it comes quite as close. There are parts of season 8 that I love.
Yeah.
So I would have trouble saying this was the last great episode because that writes off all of season 8. I think Forehead Sweat deserves to be called a great episode. But I'm having trouble putting my finger on. I guess this is not happening in season 8 is truly fantastic.
And Roadrunners, which Carl mentioned as well, I think,
Yeah.
Less enthusiasm.
No, I like it very much. I just can't watch it. It's just too creepy for me.
All right, let's. I've got one here from Liam Shane Coughlin. Liam says, there has to be an end point, a remarkably prescient statement from Fox Mulder. Requiem indeed represents a natural end point for the show. It feels like the best series finales, like the entire series in microcosm. The closing revelations promise much, the genesis for a much more contemporary style of serialized storytelling in the year to come. Right, then he started to talk about the season as a whole. I've cut that out, but it's good stuff if people want to go to the Facebook thread and read it all. I'll just jump forward a bit. He says, in the final stretch of the 7th season, we witnessed the burgeoning evolution of the agent's relationship as the professional gives way to the personal. In a sense, this was perhaps the elusive truth at the heart of the original version of the X-Files. There was always truth to be found, answers to be told, but these elusive revelations lay in the hearts and minds of those we hold dearest to us. The story of the X-Files is as much a tale of global collusion and horrendous revelations as it is the tale of two strangers who became soulmates on a journey of discovery. Here in Requiem, this particular journey has reached its end, those two narrative threads once again perfectly entwining for an extended curtain call. Whilst the show goes on, the original dynamic bows its last here. An opportunity to look back and reflect at the evolution of the series through the trappings and characters that harken all the way back to its inception. The X-Files would continue, but something about the program passes quietly with Requiem. The dynamic innovation is that the viewer is left both eagerly anticipating a strange new future and mourning the end of a very special era. And at the last part, he quoted to me, he says, and Carl, I got through that without mentioning the word crepuscular once, kind sir. Now that's a reference to the Thief episode where I teased him about some of the language used. I'm glad he took it the right way. I was being very affectionate, I think, because I really like Liam's messages. Kurt, you joined in the teasing on the Thief episode as well, I think, from what I remember. So
I did. I can't speak. I can't pronounce anything.
No, really good message. I like what he says about you kind of anticipate a strange new future and you sort of mourn the end of an era. I think it goes back to what you were saying, Darren. I think you said at the outset about in the popular consciousness, the X-Files is probably the first 7 seasons, isn't it? It's Mulder and Scully paired on these cases in the office. So it is the end of an era.
It is, and I think it's kind of interesting that kind of discussion about how this is the end of an era, in terms of like intertwining the grand mythology and the kind of quest for these two people to find each other. Because I think I do absolutely love the 8th season. I think the 8th season is phenomenal. I think the 8th season is much more overt in the idea that the truth Mulder and Scully were looking for all along was themselves or was each other. And I think that like the arc of the 8th season is like making that very explicit. And I think you do lose something when you go from the 7th season to the 8th season in terms of mythology, because the mythology of the 8th season is a lot more basic. It's very much, again, invasions of the body snatchers. It doesn't have quite as much going on as a lot of the earlier mythology. So I do think that that's a very astute observation about what is lost in the transition. It kind of goes from being about two things in parallel to being about one of those things over the other. And I thought that was a very good point, kind of made in the comment there. But yeah, this does feel like an ending for the show in popular consciousness. I know the show had technically been in decline in the ratings. I think, since the start of the 6th season, it had been like the numbers had been in decline. The expectation was that this would be cancelled. And being honest, if it had aired in any other year, if it had aired a season or two earlier or later on Fox, it probably would have been cancelled at this point. It's almost a fluke that the show continued on in the way that it did. But such is the nature of television. And again, that's one of the things I love about The X-Files as a show, is that it's inexorably tied to the medium in which it was produced. So much of how it turned out is down to the production realities of trying to make a weekly television show governed by forces outside the control of the people making it. Things like the whole mythology stemming from the fact that Gillian Anderson got pregnant, the fact that, the production team didn't know what they couldn't do. The fact that Duchovny brought the show to Los Angeles, the fact that Fox insisted that they continue making it after they make the movie. I find that level of happy accidents at work shaping the show, and then us trying to impose meaning on it after the fact, and the writers trying to figure it out as they go, just again adds all this layers to the X-Files that I just adore. Sorry.
Yeah, well, no, it keeps us in business at the X-Cast, certainly. Cathy, is the reason, or one of the reasons, you're drawn back to Requiem so often, like that sense of the end of a very special era? Is that part of the big pull for you, do you think?
I think so. I mean, my favorite era of the X-Files is definitely within the first 7 seasons. And it does seem like an ending. Nothing is the same for Mulder and Scully after this episode. It has to change. And I do mourn the loss of what we've had before after this episode. But I think that that Requiem closes us out of that era so beautifully that I just can't get enough of it. I think it's perfect. It's not my most watched episode, I'll put it that way, but it is my favorite. If I could only have one episode of the X-Files for the rest of my life, it would be Requiem, because I think it does everything I want it to do, wrap up what we've seen in the first 7 years.
Okay, cool. We'll just do 2 more quick comments. Clara Cook says, it is just a small thing, but I was really excited at the idea of the entire cast being in the same room together around a table discussing the mythology. I'm a sucker for long-established characters meeting each other for the first time in TV shows. A couple of other people commented on that scene as well.
What do we think Krychek and the Lone Gunman talked about?
Yeah. While they're waiting for the feed to come. Yeah, I don't know.
Maybe Longman tried to recruit Krychek because he's good at getting secrets, isn't he? So
I'm mildly surprised we didn't get a scene of Frohickey kind of making some kind of lecherous comment about Marita. I mean, that certainly would have been in character. Right, finally, Andrew Levitt said, upon first viewing the episode, I found Requiem a little cringeworthy because it seems like a who's who of the X-Files, reintroducing all of the main cast still alive while retreading a lot of the past mythology. In hindsight, my expectations were too high for what was supposed to be the final episode of the series. It has grown on me immensely over the years, though, providing a nice circularity with what came before. Mulder and Scully almost seem to sleepwalk through the familiar case aspects, but that's reflective of their now vast experience with this sort of paranormal activity. It's great to find out what happened to Krychek and to see cigarette-smoking man grasping at straws to reform the project as his end approaches. I can't help but feel sorry for him. Mulder and Scully's affection for each other is touching, especially given Mulder's abduction at the climax. The way the reveal of Scully's pregnancy is shot feels a little tacked on, despite the obvious setups for this plot point earlier in the episode. And although LA can't replicate the atmosphere of Vancouver, Requiem is one of the few LA episodes that does it well enough to make it believable. While Requiem isn't one of my favourite season finales, it's a strong episode and one of the best of the lackluster season 7. Kurt,
hello.
Lackluster, you would use that word. That's probably a word you would use, because I've heard you slagging off episodes like Thief, and...
Well, you heard. You were there. You were in the room.
I'm trying to repress it. But no, would you go along with that? Lackluster season?
No, well, you know me. I've always rated things 6 to 10. So I always think that a season of the X-Files is going to be stronger than most TV shows. Yeah. Full stop. Apart from maybe, because I haven't mentioned it yet, Millennium. But there is. This is season 7. The more I've seen, and obviously we'll talk about this more in the recap, is it's creaking quite severely, and I think there's moments in the show where I'm like, there's too many not substandard episodes in season 7 where I can't really say that for much of the other seasons. And I'll go back to what I said earlier in the season. It's between season 6 and season 8, and that's the big thing for me. Is like there's 2 quality seasons either side of it. And for everything that you've said, for likes of Requiem as a finishing, I think it's right. I think it should have been the final season. And that's saying again, like everyone else has said, that season 8 is a fantastic season, and it is the cultural thing. I think it would have been really fascinating to see what leaving it where it is right now at the end of Requiem and not doing anything else. That would have been really fascinating. But I do feel that you needed the shot in the arm if you're going to continue, and that shot in the arm was season 8. So it did feel like it was time. And going back to that whole time analogy, which I've been talking about all season, time has been slowing down in a lot of the episodes. I've had loads of slow motions, loads of reference to time. Luke picked one up on the episode of Brand X, and then we get this one, which is a rewind, and it's fascinating to think about that. It's something I wasn't expecting in Requiem before I watched it, but yeah, it just feels like the ship is starting to leak, and it's starting to go down a little bit. But you've got episodes as we've all mentioned, Requiem, Ex-Cops, Amalfati, stuff like that. So it's still a fascinating season and still has some wonderful episodes in it.
Darren, would you? Because I just listened to the Enemy episode, and I think at one point you say maybe it's the second or third weakest season overall. But would you go along with what Kurt's sort of saying of it's still a season of the X-Files, therefore it still has a lot of interest, it still has lots of highlights?
More than that, it has like a specific vibe that's different from other seasons of the X-Files. It still has something that makes it unique and interesting and worth unpacking. Like, we spent 2 hours talking about Requiem, the 7th season finale. I have spent God knows how long talking to Kurt and yourself and everybody else about episodes of this season as well. So it's not as if this season doesn't have anything of value or anything of interest. And I think what it has of interest is different from the other seasons around it. This is a different vibe than even the 9th season, where I think everybody working on it kind of knew the end was fast approaching. It has a different vibe to it than the revival seasons, which have their own kind of baggage coming with them. There's something interesting in the undeadness of it. As Kurt pointed out, the time slowing down, the time being killed, the sense of like time going by that you get watching it, where it feels like it's a season where nobody wants to move forward because they don't think that there's a future, but everybody's also uncertain that this is going to be the end, so there's no real finality to it. So it has this kind of, Kurt used the word to describe the episode that we're talking about, ethereal quality to it. It has this kind of otherness, this detached quality, this feeling of not quite right, not quite realness, which I think works reasonably well if you take a step back from it. I agree with Kurt entirely. I think if you're looking at this on an episode-by-episode basis, this has some very weak episodes. Some episodes that I think are conceptually interesting, but the execution is not great. And I completely understand that. You've churned out at this stage well over 100 episodes of the show. It's making television is hard. You can kind of sense that exhaustion, I think, behind the scenes on things like Fight Club. But that doesn't make Fight Club a better episode, even if it makes it an interesting episode, I would argue. So I kind of agree with what Kurt said there. I do think that there is a lot of interesting stuff in the 7th season. I think it's fun to talk about. I think it's fun to look at from a distance. But when I was going episode... sorry, that's the most backhanded compliment imaginable. But when I was going through the show episode by episode, watching it and kind of writing my reviews of it, the 7th season was the one where I seemed to just hit a brick wall with every episode, kind of.
Interesting.
It was the one that was hard to get through, because at least the 9th season, like, the 9th season was insane. The 9th season it was a lot to figure out. Whereas the 7th season has a really interesting mood and ambience, but it just, when you're watching it in quick succession, I find it draining, which is a terrible thing to say, and it's probably meaner than anything I have said this episode. So I'm gonna stop there. I'm gonna kit while I'm ahead.
Well, we're gonna segue because Cathy, this is one of your favourite seasons, Cathy.
Oh, sorry, Cathy.
Right? No, it's fine. We're just nicer to end on a positive.
No, sorry, I didn't mean to.
I'm not sorry. I'm not in the least bit surprised that me and Cathy are complete opposite ends of the spectrum. It's fine.
I'm sorry.
I haven't actually ranked
Yeah.
the seasons,
Okay.
but it does contain some of my favorite episodes. My favorite section of the X-Files is the cancer arc, but I think season 7 comes close behind that. I definitely wouldn't put it, I mean, someone said the second worst season, so that means both 9 and 10, either 9 or 10 is worse than or better than season 7. I would never go that far. I think both
10 and 11 are shorter, I would say. That is the one advantage that they have. That was me, and I feel the need to defend myself. Sorry, Cathy.
A season being 6 episodes.
It's hard to rank.
Okay.
It's hard to,
Well, I love most of season 11, but season 10 I feel is
that's fair. That's fair.
a letdown. My most recent rewatch, because I watch sequentially start to finish, and my most recent one I was very let down by season 10. But season 7 never. There are 3 episodes that I don't care for, but I rarely skip. So I think this last time I probably did skip first person shooter.
I think that's a reasonable
because
choice.
I wasn't doing it.
It is the worst episode of the X-Files.
I was watching for Mulder's forearms, and you have to watch first person shooter if you're focusing on Mulder's forearms. So
as I say,
anyway.
first person shooter is the worst episode.
No,
I heard you, Kurt. I just like that you're doubling down. I like that you're.
It's at the bottom, but there are worse. But no, I like season 7 very much. I enjoy watching it. I enjoy it because Mulder and Scully both seem so ready for something. And I mean, it's almost unbearable how ready they are. And then they get there and, it's wonderful.
Yeah, I'll just say at this point that I do like season 7 quite a bit, actually. We are doing a couple of episodes on the X-Cast, sort of post-season 7 reflection. So we'll return to this, I think, at another point. I think all that's left for us to do now, probably, unless anyone has anything else they're desperate to bring up, is to find out where everybody is online. Darren, you're in lots of places online, aren't you? Tell us the highlights. What are you up to?
All right, so I am absolutely everywhere. Just a quick Google of my name will turn up various places where I am doing various things. I write at The Escapist, where I write columns roughly 2-3 times a week. I also do a video footage there with videos there looking at pop culture with the wonderful Omar Ahmed as my editor. He's really fantastic. All the great stuff is him. Everything else is me. And I also do a co-host a podcast with my good friend Andrew Quinn called The 250, which you can find just by Googling The 250. We're very proud of that Google bomb. And we cover basically the IMDb's top 250 and bottom 100 movies of all time. So as this is coming out, I believe it is coming out in late November for subscribers or patrons, and possibly for casual listeners, we will be segueing neatly into our Christmas schedule. So if you're arriving in late November, you'll be able to catch myself and Andrew talking about Sunrise, A Song of Two Humans, the F.W. Murnau classic silent film from 1927, arguably the best year in the history of silent cinema. If you arrive a bit late, you will land just in time for our Christmas coverage, which will include a 3-hour discussion, and I am sorry, about Star Wars The Last Jedi, discussions of The Fellowship of the Ring to mark its 20th anniversary, and on Christmas Day itself, Some Like It Hot. We have fantastic guests lined up for those. I am very, very excited. You can find me also on Twitter at Darren_Mooney.
Cheers, Darren. That does sound fascinating. Yeah, The Last Jedi. People don't get tired of arguing about that one online.
It's the only one that listeners have actually demanded. It's the only time that, for the past 5 years, every Christmas we've done a Star Wars episode, and we've always gotten feedback on our Twitter that is, when are you doing Last Jedi? And the answer's always been never, because it's not on the list. And so we decided this year we would give everybody a Christmas treat.
Give the people what they want. Brilliant. And finally, Cathy, how about you? Where are you and what are you up to?
I am on Twitter at Cathy Glinski 2, and I tweet almost every day about the X-Files. It's fascinating stuff. So that's it. Yeah.
Perfect. Cheers, Cathy. And thanks to all of you. I think it's been really fun to talk about Requiem tonight. So I'm on Twitter at CKJ Sweeney. You can find the Xcast at the X_cast. You can also find us on Instagram, where myself and Sarah are posting over there. And on Facebook, of course, the X-Files Basement, the Xcast Basement group. Okay, so that's it for Requiem. That's it for season 7. So until next time, listeners, always remember, trust no one.
Elsewhere on We Made This. We dig music.
I feel that this is the first song that properly ripped into R. Kelly as well.
Which is amazing.
Wow.
Yeah, that's right. So R. Kelly has
bang on time.
Only just been convicted.
Yeah.
The first time I ever heard of R. Kelly was reading Smash Hits So this is before I'd even started reading Kerrang. So I started getting Kerrang in 95, so this must have been 94.
Yep.
And it was when...
he married Aaliyah, who was 14?
Yeah,
at the
basically Aaliyah had just released her album Age Ain't Nothing But a Number.
The Movie Palace Podcast.
The book I want to tell you about is The Art of American Screen Acting, 1912 to 1960, by Dan Callahan. What I tried to do in my movie programs is introduce people to films they haven't seen, and some of these people are younger viewers who haven't watched a lot of classic cinema, especially anything predating Star Wars. They'll often make comments like, "I really liked the movie, but the acting back then was pretty awful." The Art of American Screen Acting meets such comments head on.
Observing the Pattern, a Fringe podcast.
So there is a real element of redemption. You know, we talk about William Bell getting redemption in this episode, or redeeming himself for his actions with his sacrifice, but the whole arc of Fringe is in many ways Walter redeeming himself as well, and realising what he's done wrong, for one thing, and realising where he's gone wrong and coming to terms with that. So yeah, this is a very key point, I think, in that whole macro story of Fringe, as well as Walter's character.
Yeah, definitely. And there's also an element that we discussed in a previous episode about the weaponization of children.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network. The Xcast and X-Files podcast was created by Tony Black and is produced and hosted by Carl Sweeney, Sarah Blair and Kurt North.
You can find the podcast on Twitter at the X_cast, on Facebook by typing in the Xcast, and in our group, X-Files Basement, the Xcast podcast fan group, and on Instagram at the Xcast pod.
Don't forget, you can support the show by becoming a member on Patreon. Our patrons get early access to episodes, behind-the-scenes chats with our hosts and a thriving community of X-Files, and other premium interviews and specials. To find out more and subscribe, you can go to patreon.com/thexcast. That's patreon.com/thexcast.
We are also part of the We Made This podcast network, full of popular culture shows, including our Millennium series, The Time Is Now. You can find all of our shows at our website, wemadethispod.com, or via Twitter at wemadethispod.
Thanks for listening and keep watching the skies.